Before the first pyramid pierced the desert sky, before the first pharaoh claimed divine kingship, there existed only the endless, dark waters of none. This primordial ocean stretched infinitely in all directions, containing within its depths the potential for all existence yet to come. From these waters emerged not just the world of the living, but also its inevitable counterpart, the realm that would become known as Duat, the Egyptian Underworld. The creation of Duat did not occur as an afterthought to the world of the living, but rather as an essential component of cosmic architecture. Ancient Egyptian theologians understood that existence required three fundamental states: life, death, and the complete dissolution into nothingness. Duat occupied the crucial middle ground, serving as the realm where the deceased could potentially achieve renewed life rather than face total annihilation. This concept emerged from the observation that the sun itself appeared to die each evening, journey through an unseen realm during the night, and emerge reborn each dawn. The cosmological framework that gave birth to Duat centered on the eternal struggle between Ma'at and Isfet, forces so fundamental that they preceded even the gods themselves. Ma'at represented not merely justice or truth, but the very principle of cosmic order that allowed existence to maintain its structure. This force manifested as the natural cycles of the Nile's flooding, the predictable movement of celestial bodies, and the hierarchical organization of society. Isfet stood as its antithesis, embodying chaos, disorder, and the constant threat of dissolution that lurked at the edges of creation. The underworld's primary purpose stemmed directly from this cosmic duality. Duat served as the testing ground, where the forces of Ma'at and Isfet would wage their most crucial battles over the souls of the deceased. Every night as Ra's solar bark descended below the western horizon, it entered this realm carrying not just the sun's light, but the hopes of countless dead who sought to accompany the god on his perilous journey toward rebirth. The geography of Duat itself reflected this struggle, with regions of order and safety alternating with zones of primordial chaos where serpents, demons, and other hostile entities sought to prevent the sun's renewal. The theological foundations for Duat's existence found their earliest systematic expression through two competing yet complementary creation myths that emerged from major religious centres. The Ogdoad of Hermopolis presented creation as emerging from four pairs of primordial deities, each representing opposing forces that existed within the waters of Nun. Nun and Naunet embodied the primordial waters themselves, while Her and Hauhet represented infinite space. Kek and Kauket personified the darkness that filled this space, and Amun and Amaunet represented the hidden, unknowable aspects of creation. These 8 deities did not create through conscious will, but rather through their very existence and interaction within the primordial waters. Their movements and combinations generated the cosmic egg from which the sun god emerged, bringing light and order to the universe. Crucially, the Ogdoad's theology maintained that the forces of chaos and darkness were not eliminated by creation, but rather contained and channeled into specific realms. Duat became the primary repository for these necessary but dangerous forces, where they could serve the cosmic order by testing and purifying the dead, while remaining safely separated from the world of the living. The Aeneid of Heliopolis offered a more hierarchical understanding of creation, centered on the god Atum who emerged from Nun through an act of conscious will and self-generation. Atum created the first divine couple, Shu and Tefnut, through masturbation or spitting, depending on the version of the myth. These deities produced Geb and Nut, who in turn gave birth to the 2 divine couples Osiris and Isis, and Set and Nephthys. This genealogy established a clear divine hierarchy that would prove crucial for understanding the governance of the afterlife. The Heliopolitan system positioned Ra often conflated with Atum as the supreme solar deity whose daily journey established the fundamental rhythm of existence. His descent into Duat each evening represented not weakness or defeat, but rather the necessary fulfillment of cosmic duty. The underworld existed as Ra's domain during the night hours, and his successful navigation of its perils ensured the continuation of life itself. The Aeneid provided the divine administrators who would oversee different aspects of the afterlife, with Osiris eventually emerging as the primary judge of the dead and ruler of Duat's blessed regions. The earliest textual evidence for Egyptian underworld concepts appears in the pyramid texts, carved into the burial chambers of Old Kingdom pharaohs beginning with Unis around 2375 BCE. These texts reveal a sophisticated but still developing understanding of the afterlife that differed significantly from later conceptions. The deceased pharaoh was envisioned as joining Ra in his solar bark, participating directly in the sun's daily journey across the sky and through the underworld. This royal afterlife emphasized transformation and divine identification rather than moral judgment. The pyramid texts describe the field of reeds, a paradise where the deceased could enjoy an idealized version of earthly life. This realm featured abundant harvests, perfect weather, and freedom from the struggles that characterized mortal existence. However, access to this paradise required the deceased to demonstrate knowledge of specific spells, passwords, and ritual procedures. The texts provided detailed instructions for navigating the various challenges that awaited the dead, including hostile gatekeepers, dangerous waterways, and regions where the very ground might prove treacherous. These early underworld concepts reflected the political and social realities of the Old Kingdom, where the pharaoh served as the sole intermediary between the divine and mortal realms. The pyramid texts assumed that the king's divine nature guaranteed his successful passage through death, while ordinary mortals faced a more uncertain fate. However, even within this royal context, the texts acknowledged that the journey through Duat involved genuine perils that required preparation, knowledge, and divine assistance to overcome. As Egyptian civilization evolved through the Middle Kingdom and into the New Kingdom, the conception of Duat grew increasingly complex and democratized. The underworld expanded from a relatively simple transit zone for the solar bark into a vast multi-layered realm with distinct regions, each governed by specific deities and populated by unique challenges. The coffin texts of the Middle Kingdom began extending afterlife privileges beyond the royal family to wealthy nobles and officials, while the Book of the Dead from the New Kingdom made these concepts accessible to anyone who could afford the necessary papyrus scrolls and burial preparations. This evolution reflected changing social structures and religious thought, but it also responded to the inherent theological challenges posed by the underworld's existence. If Duat served as a testing ground for the dead, what criteria determined success or failure? How could the forces of chaos be contained within the cosmic order without undermining Ma'at itself? Why did some individuals achieve blessed afterlife while others faced destruction? These questions drove the continuous elaboration and refinement of underworld mythology throughout Egyptian history. The geographical conception of Duat became increasingly sophisticated as Egyptian theologians grappled with these challenges. The underworld was understood to parallel the Nile Valley, with a great river flowing through its centre and various regions extending along its banks. However, unlike the familiar geography of Egypt, Duat's landscape defied normal physical laws. Rivers might flow uphill, the sky could appear below ground, and distances could expand or contract according to magical principles rather than physical measurement. The 12 hours of night corresponded to 12 distinct regions within Duat, each presenting unique obstacles and opportunities for the solar bark and its accompanying souls. Some regions featured lakes of fire that could either purify the righteous or consume the wicked, depending on the moral state of those who encountered them. Others contained fields where the dead could cultivate crops using tools made of meteorite iron, or courts where divine judges weighed the hearts of the deceased against the feather of Ma'at. The population of Duat included not only the dead and the gods who governed them, but also a vast array of supernatural beings whose existence served specific functions within the cosmic order. Beneficial entities included the blessed dead who had successfully completed their transformation, protective deities who assisted worthy souls in their journey, and divine servants who maintained the infrastructure necessary for the underworld's operation. Hostile forces ranged from demons who sought to devour the unprepared dead, to serpents of primordial chaos who threatened the solar bark itself. The most significant of these hostile entities was Apophis, a massive serpent that embodied the forces of Isfet and sought to prevent Ra's nightly renewal. This creature did not simply oppose the sun god through malice, but rather represented the fundamental tendency toward dissolution that threatened all existence. Each night Apophis would attempt to swallow the solar bark, and each night the forces of order would rally to defeat this threat. However, the serpent could never be permanently destroyed, as the complete elimination of chaos would paradoxically undermine the cosmic balance that Ma'at represented. The architectural principles governing Duat reflected this cosmic struggle between order and chaos. Regions aligned with Ma'at featured geometric precision, clear boundaries, and predictable natural laws. Areas dominated by Isfet exhibited fluid, shifting landscapes where normal rules might not apply. The underworld's gates and barriers served not merely as obstacles, but as filtering mechanisms that separated souls according to their spiritual preparation and moral worth. The divine tragedy that would forever alter the nature of death and resurrection began not in the shadowy depths of Duat, but in the golden halls of the gods themselves. Osiris, eldest son of Geb and Nut according to Heliopolitan theology, ruled as the first king of Egypt with wisdom that surpassed all mortal understanding. His reign brought unprecedented prosperity to the land, teaching humanity the arts of agriculture, brewing, and civilization itself. The black soil of the Nile Delta flourished under his guidance, producing harvests so abundant that famine became merely a distant memory from the chaotic times before divine kingship. Yet this golden age carried within it the seeds of its own destruction, embodied in the figure of Set, Osiris's younger brother. Where Osiris represented fertility, order, and the life-giving aspects of nature, Set personified the harsh desert, violent storms, and the destructive forces that constantly threatened Egypt's agricultural abundance. The contrast between the brothers extended beyond their divine portfolios to their very appearances and temperaments. Osiris appeared as a tall, dignified figure with green-tinted skin symbolizing vegetation and renewal, his body wrapped in white linen that emphasized his role as the prototype for all mummified dead. Set manifested with red hair and eyes, his unusual head resembling no earthly animal but suggesting something alien and dangerous, perfectly suited to his dominion over foreign lands and chaotic forces. The murder of Osiris unfolded through Set's elaborate deception, a plot that demonstrated both his cunning intelligence and his fundamental misunderstanding of cosmic order. Set commissioned the construction of a magnificent chest, crafted from precious woods and inlaid with gold, silver, and precious stones. The dimensions of this sarcophagus corresponded exactly to Osiris's measurements, though Set concealed this fact from his intended victim. During a great feast attended by 72 conspirators, Set presented the chest as a gift to whoever could fit perfectly within it, knowing that only Osiris possessed the precise proportions required. When Osiris lay down inside the chest to test its fit, Set and his accomplices immediately sealed the lid with molten lead, transforming the beautiful container into an airtight tomb. They carried the sealed chest to the Nile and cast it into the waters, where the current bore it northward toward the Mediterranean Sea. This act represented more than simple fratricide. It constituted an assault on the cosmic order itself, as Set had murdered the legitimate king and disrupted the divine succession that maintained Ma'at throughout the universe. The chest containing Osiris's body drifted across the Mediterranean until it reached the Phoenician coast near the city of Byblos. There, the waves deposited it at the base of a young tamarisk tree, which grew with supernatural speed around the divine remains. The The tree's rapid growth attracted the attention of the local king, who ordered it cut down and fashioned into a pillar for his palace. Unknown to the Phoenician ruler, this pillar contained within its wooden heart the body of Egypt's murdered god, whose divine essence continued to emanate power even in death. Meanwhile, Isis began her desperate search for her husband's remains. Her quest took her throughout Egypt and beyond, following rumours, divine visions, and the guidance of various deities who sympathized with her plight. The goddess demonstrated remarkable persistence and cunning, disguising herself as a mortal woman when necessary, and using her magical abilities to extract information from reluctant sources. Her journey to Byblos required particular cleverness, as she needed to gain access to the royal palace without revealing her divine identity or alarming the Phoenician court. Isis accomplished this infiltration by befriending the queen's maidservants at a fountain outside the city. She braided their hair with supernatural skill and breathed upon them a divine fragrance that made them irresistibly attractive to their mistress. When the queen inquired about this transformation, the servants credited their new appearance to a mysterious foreign woman of extraordinary beauty and wisdom. The queen immediately summoned Isis to court, where the disguised goddess accepted the position of nursemaid to the royal infant. Each night while the palace slept, Isis would transform into a swallow and fly around the pillar containing Osiris's body, singing mournful songs that expressed her grief and determination. She also attempted to grant immortality to the Phoenician prince by placing him in magical fires that would burn away his mortal nature. However, the queen discovered this ritual and screamed in terror, breaking the spell and forcing Isis to reveal her true identity. Rather than punishing the goddess for her deception, the Old King granted her request for the pillar, understanding that he'd unknowingly harboured the remains of a great deity. Isis carefully extracted Osiris's body from the wooden pillar and transported it back to Egypt, hiding it in the marshy regions of the delta, where Set was unlikely to discover it. However, her brother-in-law's vigilance exceeded her expectations. While hunting wild boar by moonlight, Set stumbled upon the hidden corpse and flew into a rage that surpassed even his initial jealousy. This time, he determined to ensure that Osiris could never return by dismembering the body into 14 pieces and scattering them across the length and breadth of Egypt. The dismemberment of Osiris carried profound symbolic significance beyond its immediate horror. Set distributed the body parts to correspond with Egypt's traditional administrative divisions, ensuring that each region would contain a portion of the murdered god. This act simultaneously spread the pollution of divine murder throughout the land and created the potential for Osiris's power to manifest in multiple locations simultaneously. The number 14 itself held cosmic significance, representing the days of the waning moon and the gradual diminishment of light before renewal. Isis, accompanied by her sister Nephthys, embarked on a second, even more challenging quest to recover these scattered remains. Nephthys, despite being Set's wife, chose to assist Isis rather than support her husband's destructive actions. This decision reflected the goddess's understanding that Set's assault on cosmic order threatened the stability of existence itself. The two sisters travelled throughout Egypt, searching in temples, tombs, fields, and waterways for traces of Osiris's divine essence. Their search required not only physical endurance, but also magical expertise of the highest order. Each body part had been hidden or transformed by Set's malevolent power, requiring specific spells and rituals to locate and recover. The sisters often had to contend with local deities or spirits who had been influenced by Set's chaos, using a combination of persuasion, magical compulsion, and divine authority to overcome resistance. In some cases, they discovered that animals had consumed portions of Osiris's remains, necessitating the retrieval of the divine essence from within the creatures themselves. The most significant loss occurred when the sisters learned that the Oxyrhynchus fish had devoured Osiris's phallus in the Nile's waters. This particular dismemberment carried special significance because it threatened Osiris's ability to father the heir who would eventually restore divine order to Egypt. Isis responded to this crisis by crafting a replacement phallus from clay and gold, imbuing it with magical properties that would prove even more potent than the original organ. This act of creative restoration demonstrated the goddess's power to not merely recover what was lost, but to improve upon it through divine intervention. As Isis and Nephthys recovered each body part, they performed preliminary preservation rituals to prevent further decay and to begin the process of restoration. These procedures represented the first systematic mummification techniques, establishing the prototype that would guide Egyptian funerary practices for millennia to come. The sisters wrapped each recovered portion in linen treated with natron, myrrh, and other preservative substances, while reciting spells that would maintain the divine essence within the physical remains. The actual resurrection of Osiris required the combined magical efforts of both goddesses, working in concert with Thoth, the god of wisdom and magic, and Anubis, the jackal-headed deity who had become the patron of embalmers. The ritual took place in a secret location within the Delta Marshes, protected from Set's interference by powerful magical barriers. Isis and Nephthys positioned themselves at the head and feet of the reassembled corpse, while Thoth provided the necessary incantations and Anubis supervised the technical aspects of the restoration. The resurrection process unfolded over several days and nights, with each phase corresponding to specific astronomical and magical requirements. Isis transformed herself into a kite, a bird of prey whose keen eyesight symbolized her ability to perceive hidden truths, and hovered over Osiris's body while beating her wings to fan the breath of life back into his lungs. Nephthys assumed the form of a falcon, representing the swift restoration of divine power, and positioned herself to guard against any interference from hostile forces. The magical techniques employed during this resurrection established fundamental principles that would govern all subsequent Egyptian concepts of afterlife restoration. The goddesses did not simply repair Osiris's physical form, but transformed it into something more perfect than its original state. His skin acquired a permanent green tint that symbolized eternal vegetation and renewal, while his body gained the ability to exist simultaneously in multiple realms. Most significantly, the resurrection granted Osiris immunity from the normal processes of decay and dissolution that affected mortal remains. However, the restored Osiris could not return to his former role as king of the living. The experience of death and dismemberment had fundamentally altered his nature, making him more suitable for ruling the dead than governing mortal affairs. This transformation reflected a crucial theological principle. Death, even when overcome, leaves permanent changes that prevent simple restoration to previous conditions. Osiris's resurrection represented not a return to life as previously experienced, but an elevation to a new form of existence that transcended the normal boundaries between life and death. The establishment of Osiris's rule over Duat required a formal divine trial to legitimize his authority and resolve the cosmic disruption caused by Set's actions. This trial took place in the Hall of Two Truths, a vast courtroom within the underworld, where the principles of Ma'at could be applied with perfect precision. The hall's architecture reflected its function, with two identical sections representing Upper and Lower Egypt, and a central throne where Osiris would sit in judgment over the dead. The divine tribunal included 42 judges, each representing a different nome or administrative district of Egypt, ensuring that all regions of the country participated in the restoration of cosmic order. These judges possessed intimate knowledge of every possible sin or transgression, making it impossible for any soul to conceal their true nature during the afterlife judgment. Thoth served as the court's scribe, recording all proceedings with perfect accuracy, while Anubis supervised the crucial weighing of hearts that would determine each soul's fate. Osiris's transformation into the eternal judge of the dead established him as the supreme authority over all matters relating to death, resurrection, and moral evaluation. His throne, carved from a single block of black granite and decorated with symbols of divine justice, positioned him to observe every soul that entered his domain. The god's appearance in this role combined elements of his earthly kingship with symbols of his divine transformation. He wore the white crown of Upper Egypt and held the crook and flail of pharaonic authority, but his green skin and mummified form clearly identified him as a deity of death and resurrection. The symbolic significance of Osiris as the dying and reborn god extended far beyond his role in the afterlife to encompass the fundamental rhythms of Egyptian civilization. His death and resurrection parallel the annual cycle of the Nile flood, which brought life-giving water and fertile silt to Egypt's agricultural regions. Just as Osiris had been dismembered and scattered across the land before his restoration, the Nile's floodwaters spread across Egypt's fields before receding to reveal renewed soil capable of supporting abundant crops. This agricultural symbolism connected Osiris's myth to the practical realities of Egyptian life in ways that made his story immediately relevant to ordinary people. Farmers who planted seeds in the earth understood that they were participating in a cosmic drama of death and rebirth that mirrored the god's own experience. The grain that died in the soil before sprouting as new plants demonstrated the same principles that governed Osiris's transformation from murdered victim to divine ruler of the afterlife. The transformation of Osiris into the eternal judge established not merely his authority over the dead, but the fundamental architecture of Duat itself. The underworld's geography emerged as a direct reflection of the cosmic order that Osiris now embodied, with each region corresponding to specific aspects of death, judgment, and potential resurrection. Unlike the familiar landscape of Egypt with its predictable Nile flood patterns and well-mapped territories, Duat existed as a realm where physical laws bent to accommodate spiritual realities, and where distance measured not in cubits, but in the moral worthiness of those who traversed its boundaries. The 12 hours of night formed the backbone of Duat's geographical structure, each representing a distinct region that the solar bark of Ra must navigate during its nightly journey through the underworld. These divisions corresponded to the 12 hours between sunset and sunrise, but their temporal nature masked a more complex spatial reality. Each hour region possessed unique topographical features, atmospheric conditions, and populations of supernatural beings that reflected different aspects of the death and resurrection process. The first hour of night, known as the Hour of Entering the West, served as the gateway region where newly deceased souls first encountered the underworld's reality. This landscape resembled a vast twilight plain stretching endlessly towards the horizons that seemed simultaneously near and impossibly distant. The terrain consisted of fine sand the colour of dried blood, punctuated by occasional oases where palm trees bore fruit that could sustain the dead during their initial adjustment to their new existence. Strange winds moved across this plain, carrying the voices of the living from the world above and the lamentations of souls who had failed to prepare adequately for their journey. The baboons of Thoth populated this first region, serving as guides and interpreters for souls who arrived confused or disoriented by their transition from life to death. These creatures possessed human intelligence enhanced by divine wisdom, enabling them to communicate complex spiritual concepts through gestures and symbolic actions that transcended language barriers. They evaluated each new arrival's spiritual preparation and directed them toward appropriate paths deeper into Duat, separating those ready for immediate judgment from souls requiring additional purification or instruction. The second hour revealed a landscape dominated by the Great Winding Waterway, a river that defied normal hydraulic principles by flowing simultaneously in multiple directions while maintaining perfect navigational predictability for those who understood its spiritual currents. The waterway's banks consisted of crystallized tears shed by Isis during her search for Osiris, forming translucent cliffs that reflected and amplified the emotions of souls travelling along the river. These reflections served diagnostic purposes, revealing the true spiritual state of the deceased through the intensity and colour of their emotional emanations. Ferrymen operated boats along this waterway, but their vessels responded only to passengers who could demonstrate knowledge of specific passwords and ritual formulas. These guardians appeared as mummified figures with the heads of various animals, each species corresponding to different aspects of wisdom and spiritual insight. The ibis-headed ferrymen tested knowledge of sacred texts, while those with falcon heads evaluated the deceased's understanding of divine hierarchies. Crocodile-headed boatmen assessed courage and determination, refusing passage to souls who showed excessive fear or hesitation when confronted with the underworld's challenges. The third hour of night contained the Cavern of Soccer, a vast underground complex that served as both treasure house and testing ground for souls seeking resurrection. Soccer, the hawk-headed god of the Memphite necropolis, ruled this region from a throne carved from a single enormous emerald that cast green light throughout the cavern system. The walls of these caves bore hieroglyphic inscriptions that recorded every deed performed by every soul since the beginning of time, creating an archive of cosmic significance that even the gods consulted when making crucial decisions about individual fates. The cavern's geography defied conventional understanding, with passages that led simultaneously upward and downward, while maintaining level floors that never seemed to change elevation. Chambers opened into spaces larger than seemed possible given the cavern's external dimensions, while other areas compressed vast distances into steps that could be crossed in moments. The most significant feature of this region was the Lake of Fire, a body of molten gold that served multiple functions depending on the spiritual state of those who encountered it. For souls burdened with unresolved guilt or incomplete spiritual preparation, the Lake of Fire appeared as an insurmountable barrier of liquid flame that threatened immediate destruction. These individuals experienced intense heat that penetrated their spiritual forms without actually causing damage, creating a purification process that burned away accumulated negative influences from their earthly existence. The duration of this purification varied according to each soul's specific needs, with some requiring only brief exposure while others underwent extended periods of spiritual refinement. Conversely, souls who had achieved appropriate spiritual preparation found the Lake of Fire transformed into a source of renewal and empowerment. They could wade into the golden flames without discomfort, emerging with their spiritual forms enhanced and their connection to divine energy strengthened. The lake's fire served to forge these purified souls into more perfect versions of themselves, removing limitations and weaknesses that had constrained them during mortal existence. The 4th through 6th hours of night featured increasingly complex landscapes that tested different aspects of spiritual development. The 4th hour contained the Desert of Knives, where razor-sharp obsidian formations created a maze that could only be navigated through perfect adherence to Mayat's principles. Souls who attempted to take shortcuts or who deviated from righteous paths found themselves lost in endless corridors of cutting stone, while those who maintained spiritual discipline discovered that the knives transformed into protective barriers that shielded them from hostile entities. The 5th hour revealed the Valley of the Serpent, dominated by a massive cobra whose body formed the landscape itself. This creature, distinct from but related to the Chaos Serpent Apophis, served as a testing entity that evaluated each soul's ability to distinguish between beneficial and harmful supernatural forces. The serpent's scales formed stepping stones across a chasm filled with primordial darkness, but only souls who could correctly identify the creature's true nature could safely traverse this path. Those who mistook the serpent for a hostile entity found themselves paralyzed by fear, while those who recognized its protective function received guidance toward the next stage of their journey. The 6th hour contained the Hall of Judgment's antechamber, where souls underwent preliminary evaluation before facing Osiris himself. This region resembled a vast courtroom with galleries that could accommodate thousands of observers. though the space remained perpetually filled with exactly the right number of witnesses for each individual judgment. The architecture shifted to reflect the cultural background of each soul being evaluated, ensuring that the proceedings remained comprehensible and meaningful regardless of the deceased's earthly origins. The 7th through 9th hours marked the central core of Duat's geography, where the most crucial spiritual transformations occurred. The 7th hour featured the 21 gates, massive barriers constructed from materials that existed nowhere in the physical world. Each gate stood over 100 cubits tall and 50 cubits wide, fashioned from substances that combined the properties of stone, metal, and crystallized divine energy. The gate's surfaces bore intricate carvings that moved and changed according to the spiritual state of approaching souls, displaying different symbols and challenges for each individual. The guardians of these gates represented some of the most formidable entities in the Egyptian pantheon, beings whose power exceeded that of many major deities. Each guardian possessed multiple forms and could appear as animal-headed humanoids, pure geometric shapes of living light, or abstract concepts given tangible form. The guardian of the first gate manifested as a lion with wings of fire and a voice that could shatter stone, demanding that approaching souls recite the secret names of creation itself. Failure to provide correct responses resulted not in destruction, but in redirection to remedial regions where souls could acquire the necessary knowledge through extended study and purification. The guardian of the 7th gate appeared as a cobra of impossible size whose coils formed spiral patterns that hypnotized unprepared souls into revealing their true spiritual condition. This entity tested not knowledge but authenticity, identifying souls who attempted to deceive the divine tribunal through false piety or manufactured righteousness. The guardian's eyes could perceive the accumulated effects of every action performed during earthly existence, making concealment impossible for even the most skilled dissemblers. The guardian of the 14th gate took the form of a scarab beetle composed entirely of precious stones, each facet reflecting different aspects of divine truth. This entity evaluated souls' understanding of transformation and renewal, concepts central to Egyptian religious thought. Souls who demonstrated genuine comprehension of death as a transitional state rather than an ending received permission to continue, while those who remained attached to their mortal existence faced additional challenges designed to expand their spiritual perspective. The 8th hour of night contained the actual Hall of Two Truths, where Osiris presided over the weighing of hearts that determined each soul's ultimate fate. This vast chamber featured architecture that combined elements from every major Egyptian temple, creating a space that felt simultaneously familiar and transcendent to souls from any historical period. The hall's ceiling displayed a perfect reproduction of the night sky, complete with moving constellations that reflected the cosmic significance of each judgment taking place below. The weighing ceremony itself took place on a platform positioned at the hall's centre, where a massive balance scale constructed from materials found only in the realm of the gods dominated the space. One side of the scale held the feather of Ma'at, a seemingly delicate object that actually contained the concentrated essence of cosmic order accumulated since the beginning of time. The other side received the heart of the deceased, which had been carefully extracted and prepared by Anubis, using techniques that preserved its spiritual rather than physical properties. The 9th hour revealed the consequences of judgment, with passages leading to different destinations depending on the weighing's results. Souls whose hearts balanced perfectly against Ma'at's feather gained access to the field of reeds, while those found wanting faced various forms of punishment or additional purification. However, the geography of this hour provided multiple opportunities for redemption, with alternative paths available for souls who demonstrated genuine remorse and commitment to spiritual improvement. The 10th through 12th hours formed the final regions of Duat's nightly geography, where successful souls could experience the ultimate reward of Egyptian afterlife beliefs. The 10th hour contained preparatory chambers where purified souls received instruction in the privileges and responsibilities of their new existence. These spaces resembled idealized versions of Egyptian temples, with gardens that bloomed eternally and libraries containing all knowledge that had ever existed or ever would exist. The 11th hour featured the approaches to the Field of Reeds, with landscapes that gradually transformed from underworld terrain to paradisiacal environments. Rivers of pure water replaced the supernatural waterways of earlier regions, while the air itself carried fragrances of lotus blossoms and incense that never faded. The transition occurred gradually enough to allow souls to adjust to their new circumstances, without experiencing disorientation or spiritual shock. The 12th hour encompassed the Field of Reeds itself, known in Egyptian as Seket Aru, representing the ultimate destination for souls who had successfully navigated Duat's challenges. This region existed as a perfected version of Egypt, featuring the Nile's life-giving waters without the uncertainty of flood cycles, agricultural fields that produced abundant harvests without requiring labour, and cities populated by the blessed dead who had achieved spiritual fulfillment. The Field of Reeds stretched beyond normal geographical limitations, providing each resident with exactly the type of environment they found most conducive to eternal happiness while maintaining the communal aspects that made Egyptian civilization meaningful. The journey through Duat's 12 hours culminated in the most crucial moment of any soul's existence, the Psychostasis, or weighing of the heart, conducted within the Hall of Two Truths under Osiris's direct supervision. This ceremony represented far more than simple moral evaluation. It constituted the fundamental mechanism through which cosmic order maintained itself, by separating souls capable of eternal existence from those whose spiritual corruption threatened the stability of creation itself. The ritual's complexity reflected millennia of theological development, incorporating elements from multiple religious traditions while maintaining the essential Egyptian understanding that individual morality directly affected universal harmony. The Hall of Two Truths derived its name from the dual nature of truth itself, as understood by Egyptian theologians. The first truth encompassed factual accuracy, the objective reality of actions performed during earthly existence that could be verified through divine observation and recorded testimony. The second truth involved spiritual authenticity, the internal motivations, intentions, and character traits that drove those actions and revealed the soul's fundamental nature. Both aspects required evaluation because external compliance with moral codes could mask internal corruption, while pure intentions might be undermined by ignorance or weakness that led to harmful consequences. The hall's architecture reinforced this duality through its symmetrical design, with identical chambers representing Upper and Lower Egypt extending from a central judgment platform. Each chamber contained galleries where different categories of divine witnesses observed the proceedings. Deceased pharaohs who had successfully completed their own judgment occupied the most prominent positions, while lesser nobles, priests and commoners arranged themselves according to their spiritual achievements rather than earthly rank. The galleries could accommodate infinite numbers of observers without becoming crowded, as the hall's dimensions adjusted automatically to provide perfect viewing angles for every witness present. Anubis dominated the weighing ceremony through his role as the divine embalmer and guardian of funeral rites. His jackal head, with its keen senses adapted for detecting decay and corruption, symbolized his ability to perceive the true spiritual condition of every soul regardless of their attempts at concealment or self-deception. The god's black skin represented the fertile soil of Egypt and the life-giving potential contained within apparent death, while his humanoid body demonstrated the perfect fusion of animal instinct and divine intelligence required for accurate moral evaluation. The preparation of each soul for judgment began long before they reached the Hall of Two Truths, starting with Anubis's careful extraction of their heart during the mummification process. This procedure differed fundamentally from the physical removal of organs performed by mortal embalmers, as Anubis worked with the spiritual essence of the heart rather than its material substance. The god employed obsidian knives forged in the fires of creation itself, tools capable of separating spiritual components without damaging their essential properties or connections to the soul's overall identity. The heart's significance in Egyptian theology stemmed from their understanding of it as the seat of consciousness, memory, and moral judgment. Unlike other cultures that located the soul in the brain or distributed it throughout the body, Egyptians recognized the heart as the organ that recorded every thought, emotion, and decision made during earthly existence. The heart literally contained the accumulated weight of a person's moral choices, growing heavier with each act of cruelty, dishonesty, or selfishness, while becoming lighter through expressions of kindness, justice, and devotion to Ma'at. This spiritual weight possessed objective reality that could be measured with perfect precision using the cosmic scales maintained within the Hall of Two Truths. The scales themselves represented one of the most sophisticated magical artifacts in Egyptian mythology, constructed from materials that existed only within the divine realm and calibrated to detect moral differences too subtle for any consciousness except the gods themselves to perceive. The balance mechanism incorporated elements of crystallized time, allowing it to weigh not just current spiritual condition, but the trajectory of moral development throughout the soul's entire existence. The feather of Ma'at served as the standard against which every heart was measured, but this seemingly delicate object contained compressed within its structure the entire weight of cosmic order accumulated since creation began. The feather appeared different to each soul undergoing judgment, sometimes manifesting as pure white to represent innocence and spiritual purity, other times displaying iridescent colours that reflected the complex interplay of forces maintaining universal harmony. Its apparent lightness masked tremendous spiritual density, as it embodied not the absence of weight, but the perfect balance that allowed existence itself to continue. Before the actual weighing could commence, each soul faced the preliminary challenge of the 42 negative confessions, a comprehensive examination that addressed every possible category of sin or moral failing recognized by Egyptian religious law. These confessions required the deceased to stand before 42 judges, each representing a different nome or administrative district of Egypt, and declare their innocence of specific transgressions while demonstrating genuine understanding of why such actions violated cosmic order. The 42 judges arranged themselves in a precise semicircle around the judgment platform, their positioning determined by complex astronomical calculations that ensured each nome's spiritual influence remained properly balanced during the proceedings. Each judge possessed intimate knowledge of their assigned category of sin, having observed countless examples throughout Egyptian history and developed sophisticated understanding of the various forms such transgressions could take. They could detect not only direct violations of moral law, but also the subtle compromises and rationalizations that allowed seemingly righteous individuals to engage in harmful behavior while maintaining their self-image as virtuous people. The first judge, representing the nome of Memphis, presided over cases involving murder and violence. This entity appeared as a figure with the head of a crocodile, symbolizing the predatory nature of those who took life unlawfully, but wore the white crown of Upper Egypt to demonstrate that even the most serious crimes remained subject to divine justice rather than arbitrary vengeance. Souls facing this judge had to declare, "I have not killed men and women," while demonstrating through their spiritual emanations that they genuinely understood the sanctity of life and had never acted from motives that devalued other people's existence. The second judge, from the Letopolitan nome, specialized in theft and property crimes. This figure manifested with the head of a hawk, representing the keen vision required to detect all forms of dishonesty, while holding scales that could measure not just material theft, but the spiritual robbery that occurred when individuals claimed credit for others' achievements or failed to acknowledge their debts to society. The required confession, "I have not stolen," encompassed not only direct appropriation of others' possessions, but also tax evasion, wage theft, and the countless small dishonestries that accumulated to create significant moral weight. The third judge evaluated sexual misconduct and violations of family obligations. Appearing with the head of a baboon, this entity possessed the wisdom to distinguish between natural human desires and their destructive expressions through adultery, rape, or the abandonment of dependent family members. The confession, "I have not committed adultery," required souls to demonstrate that their sexual behaviour had remained within bounds that supported rather than undermined social stability, and that they had fulfilled their responsibilities to spouses, children, and other relatives who depended on their care and protection. Subsequent judges addressed increasingly subtle categories of moral failing, including pride, envy, gossip, religious neglect, environmental destruction, and the abuse of authority. Each confession demanded not merely the absence of specific actions, but positive evidence of virtue in the corresponding area of life. A soul claiming innocence of pride had to demonstrate genuine humility through their treatment of social inferiors, while those denying envy needed to show evidence of celebrating others' successes rather than resenting them. The 15th judge specialized in detecting false piety and religious hypocrisy. This figure appeared with the head of an ibis, sacred to Thoth, emphasizing the connection between true wisdom and authentic spiritual devotion. Souls faced with this judge could not simply claim regular temple attendance or proper performance of rituals. They had to demonstrate that their religious practices had genuinely transformed their character, rather than serving as mere social convention or insurance against divine punishment. The 23rd judge evaluated economic justice and fair dealing in commercial transactions. Manifesting with the head of a bull symbolizing both strength and productive labor, this entity could detect every instance of fraud, price manipulation, or exploitation of workers throughout a soul's earthly career. The required confession, "I have not cheated in the market," extended beyond simple honesty in buying and selling to encompass fair wages, honest advertising, and the ethical treatment of business partners and competitors. The 31st judge addressed environmental stewardship and the proper relationship between humans and the natural world. This figure appeared with the head of a falcon, representing the perspective needed to see humanity's place within the larger ecosystem, while holding symbols of growing plants that demonstrated the life-giving potential of proper environmental management. Souls, claiming innocence of environmental destruction, had to show evidence of responsible resource use and genuine concern for the welfare of future generations. The 38th judge specialized in the abuse of knowledge and education. Appearing with the head of a serpent, symbolizing both wisdom and its potential for harm, this entity evaluated whether souls had used their learning to benefit society or merely to advance their personal interests at others' expense. Teachers who had neglected their students, scribes who had falsified records, and intellectuals who had promoted harmful ideas all faced particular scrutiny from this judge. The final judge, representing the 42nd gnome, addressed the fundamental question of spiritual authenticity versus mere compliance with external moral codes. This entity manifested as a figure whose appearance shifted constantly, reflecting the complex and often contradictory nature of human motivation, while maintaining eyes that could perceive the deepest levels of consciousness where true character resided. The confession required before this judge, "I have not acted with duplicity," demanded evidence that the soul's public behavior genuinely reflected their private thoughts and intentions, rather than calculated performance designed to manipulate others' opinions. Throughout this extensive examination, Thoth served as the divine scribe responsible for recording every word spoken and every spiritual emanation detected during the proceedings. The god's ibis head symbolized his connection to wisdom and learning, while his humanoid body demonstrated his ability to translate abstract spiritual concepts into concrete records that could be referenced throughout eternity. Thoth employed writing instruments crafted from materials that existed only within the divine realm, including reed pens made from the first papyrus that grew along the celestial Nile, and ink prepared from the crystallized tears of Ra himself. The god's recording methods transcended simple transcription to create multi-dimensional documents that captured not only the literal content of each confession, but also the emotional context, spiritual atmosphere, and cosmic significance of every moment during the judgment process. These records formed part of a vast archive maintained within the Hall of Two Truths, providing precedents and references that ensured consistency and divine justice across all historical periods and cultural contexts. The heart's position during the weighing ceremony reflected careful consideration of both practical and symbolic factors. Anubis placed the organ on the scale's left side, corresponding to the deceased's left side where the heart had resided during earthly existence, while Maat's feather occupied the right side, representing the divine order toward which all souls should aspire. The scales themselves stood precisely at the hall's geometric centre, ensuring that cosmic forces remained perfectly balanced during the measurement process. The actual weighing occurred through processes that transcended physical mechanics to operate according to spiritual laws that govern the deepest levels of reality. The heart's weight fluctuated according to the soul's spiritual condition at the moment of judgment, potentially becoming lighter if the deceased demonstrated genuine remorse for past failings, or heavier if they attempted to justify actions that violated cosmic order. This dynamic quality meant that the ceremony's outcome remained uncertain until the final moment, providing opportunities for last-minute redemption while preventing souls from gaming the system through calculated repentance. The feather of Ma'at maintained absolute consistency in its spiritual weight, serving as an unchanging standard against which all moral development could be measured. However, its appearance during the weighing ceremony varied according to each soul's spiritual preparation and cultural background, ensuring that divine justice remained comprehensible and meaningful regardless of the deceased's earthly origins or historical period. For souls whose hearts balanced exactly with Ma'at's feather, the scales remained perfectly level, while emanating golden light that filled the entire Hall of Two Truths with radiance symbolizing the harmony achieved between individual will and cosmic order. These successful souls received immediate access to the field of reeds, where they could enjoy eternal existence in an idealized version of earthly life, enhanced by divine blessing and freed from the limitations and sufferings that had constrained their mortal experience. However, souls whose hearts proved heavier than the feather faced the terrible presence of Ammit, the Devourer of hearts, whose very existence represented the ultimate consequence of moral failure. This creature combined the most fearsome aspects of three apex predators: the head of a crocodile with jaws capable of crushing any substance, the torso and arms of a lion possessing strength that could tear apart the fabric of reality itself, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus, whose massive bulk symbolized the inexorable nature of divine justice. Ammit's composite form reflected the comprehensive nature of the destruction she represented, as her consumption of failed souls resulted not merely in death, but in complete spiritual annihilation that erased all traces of their existence from the cosmic record. The creature's presence during judgment proceedings served multiple functions beyond simple execution of divine sentences. Her appearance reminded all souls of the stakes involved in moral evaluation, encouraging genuine honesty during the confession process, while discouraging attempts at deception or manipulation. Additionally, Ammit's role as Devourer provided a necessary mechanism for removing spiritual corruption from the cosmic system, preventing the accumulation of negative influences that might eventually threaten the stability of creation itself. Yet the cosmic machinery of judgment and resurrection could not function through the authority of Osiris alone. The vast expanse of Duat required a complex hierarchy of divine guardians, each possessing specialized knowledge and powers necessary to maintain order within the realm of the dead. Chief among these protectors stood Anubis, whose transformation from an independent deity of the desert necropolis into Osiris's primary lieutenant represented one of the most significant theological developments in Egyptian religious history. Anubis's distinctive jackal head reflected his original association with the wild dogs and jackals that scavenged around Egyptian burial grounds, creatures whose keen senses and nocturnal habits made them natural symbols for a deity who guided souls through the darkness of death. However, the god's role extended far beyond simple funerary symbolism to encompass the fundamental process of spiritual transformation that converted mortal remains into vessels capable of eternal existence. His black skin, darker than the fertile Nile silt, represented not death as ending, but death as the necessary precondition for rebirth into higher forms of existence. The god's fierce protective nature manifested most clearly during the mummification process, where he served as both technical supervisor and spiritual guardian for the deceased. Anubis employed techniques that transcended mortal embalming practices, using obsidian knives forged in celestial fires to perform incisions that separated a physical corruption from spiritual essence without damaging either component. His hands, depicted as human but possessing supernatural strength and precision, could manipulate the subtle energies that animated corpses while removing organs with surgical accuracy that exceeded anything achievable through purely physical means. During the crucial extraction of the heart, Anubis demonstrated particular care to preserve not only the organ's physical structure, but also the accumulated memories, emotions, and moral choices it contained. The god employed specialized canopic vessels crafted from materials that existed only within the divine realm, including crystallized starlight and compressed time itself, to maintain the heart's spiritual properties during the interval between death and judgment. These containers prevented the decay or alteration of moral evidence that might compromise the accuracy of divine justice, while protecting the heart from interference by hostile entities seeking to manipulate the judgment process. The god's role as psychopomp, or guide of souls, required him to navigate the complex geography of Duat while protecting newly deceased individuals from the numerous dangers that threatened unprepared spirits. Anubis possessed intimate knowledge of every pathway, shortcut, and hidden hazard within the underworld, accumulated through millennia of conducting souls through the 12 hours of night. His guidance proved essential for souls who lacked the magical knowledge or spiritual preparation necessary to traverse Duat independently, as even minor navigational errors could result in permanent entrapment within regions of primordial chaos. The god's protective techniques included the creation of magical barriers that shielded souls from hostile entities, while allowing beneficial influences to reach them without obstruction. These barriers appeared as translucent walls of golden light that moved with the protected soul, adjusting their configuration automatically to counter specific threats, while maintaining the permeability necessary for continued spiritual development. Anubis could establish these protections through brief rituals that combined spoken incantations with precise gestures, drawing power from his connection to the cosmic order that governed all aspects of death and resurrection. His fierce nature emerged most dramatically when confronting entities that threatened souls under his protection. Anubis possessed combat abilities that rivaled those of Set himself, wielding weapons forged from the same celestial materials used in his embalming tools. His primary weapon, a staff topped with his own jackal head rendered in solid gold, could channel divine energy with sufficient intensity to destroy even powerful demons while leaving righteous souls completely unharmed. The staff's length adjusted according to combat requirements, extending to spear-like proportions for distant enemies or contracting to club size for close quarters fighting, the god's supernatural senses allowed him to detect threats that remained invisible to other divine entities, including shape-shifting demons that disguised themselves as helpful guides or beneficial spirits that had been corrupted by contact with chaos entities. His jackal nose could distinguish between thousands of different spiritual emanations, identifying the unique scent signatures that revealed each entity's true nature regardless of their apparent form. These abilities made Anubis invaluable as an early warning system for the Underworld's defensive network, as he could detect invasions or infiltrations long before they reached critical areas like the Hall of Two Truths. Working alongside Anubis in the protection of deceased souls were the four sons of Horus, divine entities whose specialized roles reflected the complex requirements of preserving both physical remains and spiritual essence during the afterlife transition. These four gods, Imseti, Duamutef, Hapi, and Qebehsenuef, originated as independent deities associated with different aspects of funeral rites before being incorporated into the Assyrian theological system as protectors of the deceased vital organs. Imseti, the human-headed sun, assumed responsibility for protecting the liver, an organ that Egyptian medical knowledge recognized as crucial for maintaining the body's internal balance and purification processes. His human appearance symbolized the preservation of the deceased's essential humanity during their transformation into divine beings, ensuring that successful souls retained their individual personalities and memories rather than dissolving into undifferentiated divine essence. Imseti's protective techniques involved surrounding the liver with spiritual barriers that prevented decay, while maintaining the organ's connection to the soul's overall identity. The god's guardianship extended beyond simple preservation to encompass active purification of the liver from accumulated toxins, both physical and spiritual, that might impede the resurrection process. Imseti employed techniques derived from celestial medicine, using energies channeled directly from beneficial stars to cleanse the organ of corrupting influences while strengthening its natural functions. These procedures required precise timing coordinated with specific astronomical configurations, as the liver's spiritual properties fluctuated according to cosmic cycles that affected all aspects of death and rebirth. Imseti's association with the south cardinal direction connected his protective role to the life-giving power of the sun at its zenith, when Ra's energy reached maximum intensity and could overcome even the strongest manifestations of chaos and corruption. This directional alignment allowed the god to draw power from solar sources during daylight hours, while maintaining his protective capabilities throughout the night by storing excess energy in crystalline matrices embedded within his divine form. Duamutef, distinguished by his jackal head that echoed Anubis's appearance while maintaining distinct characteristics, served as guardian of the stomach and the digestive processes that sustained life during earthly existence. His canine features reflected his ability to detect spiritual corruption with the same keen senses that allowed jackals to identify disease carrion, making him particularly effective at identifying and neutralizing threats to the deceased's spiritual purity. The god's protective methods focused on maintaining the stomach's capacity to process spiritual nourishment required for existence in the afterlife. The stomach's significance in Egyptian afterlife theology stemmed from their understanding of digestion as a transformative process that converted external substances into internal energy, paralleling the spiritual transformation that converted mortal souls into divine beings. Duamutef's guardianship ensured that this transformation capacity remained intact during the death transition, allowing resurrected souls to derive sustenance from the spiritual foods available in the field of reeds, while avoiding contamination from substances that might compromise their purified state. Duamutef's association with the east cardinal direction linked his protective role to the daily rebirth of the sun, whose emergence from the underworld each dawn demonstrated the possibility of renewal after apparent death. This directional connection provided the god with access to the transformative energies present at the moment of sunrise, when the boundary between night and day became permeable and allowed for the exchange of power between different cosmic realms. Hapi, the baboon-headed protector, assumed responsibility for the lungs and the respiratory processes that connected the deceased to the spiritual atmosphere of the afterlife. His simian appearance reflected the association between baboons and wisdom in Egyptian religious thought, as these animals' complex social behaviours and apparent intelligence made them natural symbols for the sophisticated understanding required to navigate the underworld's challenges. Hapi's protective techniques focused on maintaining the lungs' capacity to process the rarefied spiritual atmosphere of Duat, while filtering out harmful influences that might damage the soul's essential nature. The lungs' importance in afterlife theology derived from their role in speech production, as the ability to recite magical formulas and respond correctly to divine challenges determined each soul's success in navigating the underworld's obstacles. Hapi's guardianship ensured that resurrected souls retained their capacity for articulate communication while gaining access to the expanded vocabulary of divine languages necessary for interaction with celestial entities. The god employed techniques that enhanced the lungs' spiritual sensitivity, allowing souls to perceive and respond to subtle atmospheric changes that indicated the presence of beneficial or hostile forces. Hapi's connection to the North Cardinal direction associated his protective role with the circumpolar stars that never set below the horizon, symbolizing eternal existence and unchanging divine order. This directional alignment provided the god with access to the stable cosmic forces that maintained consistency throughout the cycles of death and rebirth, ensuring that his protective capabilities remained constant regardless of temporal or seasonal variations. Kebesenuef, the falcon-headed guardian, protected the intestines and the complex processes of absorption and elimination that maintained the body's internal purity during earthly existence. His raptor appearance reflected the sharp vision and swift action required to identify and remove spiritual toxins before they could compromise the soul's essential nature. The god's protective methods involved continuous monitoring of the intestine's spiritual condition while employing purification techniques that eliminated accumulated negative influences without damaging beneficial spiritual components. The intestine's significance in afterlife theology stemmed from their role in separating useful nutrients from waste products, a function that paralleled the spiritual discrimination required to distinguish between beneficial and harmful influences in the underworld. Kebesenuef's guardianship ensured that resurrected souls retained their capacity for spiritual discernment while gaining enhanced ability to recognize and avoid the various deceptions and temptations that threatened unprepared spirits throughout Duat. The god's association with the West Cardinal direction connected his protective role to the daily death of the sun, whose descent into the underworld each evening initiated the nightly journey through the realm of the dead. This directional alignment provided Kebesenuef with intimate knowledge of the transition processes that converted living beings into spiritual entities capable of existing within Duat's unique environment. The four sons of Horus coordinated their protective activities through complex ritual procedures that synchronized their individual capabilities while maintaining the specialized focus necessary for effective organ preservation. These coordination techniques involved the establishment of spiritual communication networks that allowed instant information sharing between the four gods while preventing interference from hostile entities that might attempt to disrupt their protective functions. Yet even these powerful guardians could not address every threat that endangered souls traversing the underworld. The serpent Apep, known also as Apophis, represented a category of danger that transcended individual malevolence to embody the fundamental forces of dissolution that threatened the existence of creation itself. This massive entity dwelt within the deepest regions of Duat, where the ordered geography of the 12 hours gave way to zones of primordial chaos that retained the characteristics of the original nun from which all existence had emerged. Apep's physical form defied conventional description as the serpent's body extended across vast distances while maintaining coherent identity throughout its entire length. Conservative estimates placed the creature's length at over 300 miles, though some theological texts suggested that its true dimensions varied according to the cosmic balance between order and chaos at any given moment. The serpent's scales appeared as individual shields large enough to protect entire armies, each one inscribed with hieroglyphs that recorded specific instances of cosmic disorder throughout the history of creation. The creature's head alone measured over 50 cubits in length, with jaws capable of swallowing the solar bark entire and fangs that dripped venom potent enough to dissolve the fundamental forces that held reality together. Apep's eyes burned with fires that predated the sun itself, containing within their depths the memory of the absolute darkness that had existed before creation began. These eyes could perceive weaknesses in the cosmic order that remained invisible to other entities, allowing the serpent to focus its attacks on the most vulnerable aspects of divine authority. Apep's eternal enmity toward Ra stemmed not from personal animosity, but from the fundamental incompatibility between order and chaos that defined the basic structure of existence. The serpent's attacks on the solar bark during its nightly journey through Duat represented necessary expressions of chaotic force that tested and strengthened the cosmic order through constant challenge. However, the creature's ultimate goal involved not merely the destruction of individual souls, or even the death of the sun god, but the complete dissolution of creation itself and the return of all existence to the undifferentiated state of primordial none. The serpent's dwelling place within Duat occupied regions where the normal laws of physics and magic became unreliable, creating zones of instability that threatened any entity that approached without adequate protection. These areas featured landscapes that shifted without warning, rivers that flowed in multiple directions simultaneously, and atmospheric conditions that could strip away spiritual essence from unprepared souls. The very ground in Apep's territory consisted of crystallized chaos that could infect other substances with its disruptive properties, making even brief contact potentially catastrophic for beings dependent on cosmic order for their continued existence. The serpent's territory represented only one of countless perils that awaited Ra as the sun god began his nightly transformation at the moment of sunset. Each evening, as the solar disk touched the western horizon, Ra underwent a fundamental metamorphosis that prepared him for the harrowing journey through Duat's hostile landscape. The god's radiant falcon-headed form, which had dominated the sky throughout the day, dissolved into his nocturnal aspect known as Alf-Ra, the ram-headed deity whose curved horns symbolized the cyclical nature of time and whose weathered features reflected the accumulated wisdom necessary to navigate the underworld's countless dangers. This transformation occurred not through weakness or defeat, but as a deliberate tactical adaptation that equipped Ra with the specific capabilities required for survival within Duat's chaotic environment. The ram's head provided enhanced sensory abilities that could detect threats invisible to normal divine perception, while its association with fertility and regeneration connected the god to the life-giving forces that would enable his eventual resurrection at dawn. The change also served protective purposes, as many of the underworld's hostile entities recognized and targeted Ra's familiar solar appearance, making the disguised form essential for avoiding immediate destruction upon entering their domain. The solar bark itself underwent corresponding modifications to accommodate the challenges of underworld navigation. The vessel's golden hull, which had gleamed brilliantly during its celestial voyage, assumed a darker bronze coloration that absorbed rather than reflected light, making it less visible to predatory entities that hunted by detecting radiant energy. The boat's dimensions expanded to accommodate the crew of protective deities necessary for the night journey, while its draft deepened to provide stability on the supernatural waters that flowed through Duat's central regions. The bark's crew assembled according to precise protocols developed through millennia of nightly voyages, with each deity assuming positions that maximized their protective capabilities while maintaining the vessel's operational efficiency. Sia, the personification of divine perception, stationed himself at the prow, where his supernatural vision could identify approaching threats long before they reached striking distance. His human form, enhanced with eyes that glowed within a fire, possessed the ability to see through illusions and shape-shifting deceptions that might otherwise lead the bark into carefully prepared ambushes. Hu, the god of authoritative speech, positioned himself near the stern where his voice could reach every corner of the vessel while projecting commands that hostile entities were compelled to obey regardless of their own intentions. His words carried the weight of cosmic law, making resistance to his orders equivalent to rebellion against the fundamental principles that maintain creation stability. During particularly dangerous passages, Hu's verbal commands could part obstacles, calm turbulent waters, or force attacking creatures to retreat without engaging in direct combat. Heka, the personification of magic itself, occupied the bark's central position where he could coordinate defensive spells while maintaining the complex magical protections that shielded the vessel from the corrosive effects of prolonged exposure to chaotic forces. His human appearance masked tremendous supernatural power that manifested through intricate hand gestures and precisely articulated incantations that could reshape reality according to divine will. Heka's magical arsenal included spells capable of creating temporary barriers, generating illusory duplicates of the bark to confuse attackers, and opening emergency passages through seemingly solid obstacles. The goddess Mat herself accompanied these voyages, her presence serving as both moral compass and protective talisman against the corrupting influences that pervaded many regions of Duat. Her ostrich feather crown remained perfectly white despite exposure to the underworld's polluted atmosphere, demonstrating the incorruptible nature of cosmic order, even within domains dominated by chaos. Mat's role extended beyond passive symbolism to include active intervention during critical moments, when her authority could override local conditions that might otherwise prove fatal to the solar bark and its divine crew. The first hour of the night journey commenced as the bark descended through the western mountains that form the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. These peaks, composed of crystallized twilight and compressed shadows, rose to heights that exceeded the tallest earthly mountains while maintaining passages just wide enough to accommodate the solar vessel. The mountains themselves possessed a form of malevolent consciousness that caused the passages to shift and narrow without warning, forcing the crew to maintain constant vigilance while navigating through terrain that actively sought to crush or trap unwary travellers. Serpentine guardians coiled around these mountain passages, their scales reflecting the last traces of daylight in patterns that could hypnotize unprepared observers into steering the bark directly into waiting jaws. These creatures measured over 100 cubits in length, with heads the size of temple chambers and fangs that dripped venom capable of corroding divine metal. However, their primary weapon consisted of their mesmerizing gaze, which could induce temporary paralysis in victims, while the serpents positioned themselves for devastating strikes against the immobilized vessel. Ra's ram-headed form proved particularly effective against these mountain guardians, as the god's curved horns could channel solar energy in focused beams that burned through even the largest serpent's scales, while his enhanced night vision allowed him to navigate the treacherous passages without succumbing to the creature's hypnotic abilities. The god's deep voice, transformed by his nocturnal form into resonant tones that could shatter stone, recited protective formulas that created safe corridors through the most dangerous sections of the mountain crossing. The second hour brought the bark onto the waters of noon that flowed through Duat's central regions, vast rivers whose dark currents carried the dissolved essence of entities that had failed to maintain their coherent existence within the underworld's harsh environment. These waters possess corrosive properties that could strip away spiritual substance from any being that made direct contact, making navigation extremely hazardous for vessels lacking adequate magical protection. The river's surface appeared deceptively calm, but powerful undercurrents could drag unwary craft into whirlpools that led directly to regions of absolute chaos from which no return was possible. Crocodile-headed demons patrolled these waters, their massive forms moving with surprising stealth beneath the dark surface, while their supernatural senses tracked the solar bark's progress from distances that exceeded normal visual range. These creatures possessed the ability to generate false currents that could divert vessels from safe channels into areas where larger predators waited in ambush. Their scales provided immunity to most forms of magical attack, while their jaws could bite through materials that existed only within the divine realm. The bark's crew employed coordinated defensive techniques to navigate these treacherous waters, with Seer's enhanced vision identifying safe passages, while Hu's authoritative commands forced hostile currents to part before the vessel's approach. Heka maintained protective barriers around the bark's hull that prevented direct contact with the corrosive waters, while Mart's presence ensured that the vessel remained on course despite the various deceptions and illusions that sought to lead it astray. The third hour featured the approach to the Cavern of Soccer, where the hawk-headed god ruled over vast underground complexes filled with treasures beyond mortal comprehension and dangers that could destroy even powerful divine entities. The cavern's entrance appeared as a massive gateway carved from black granite and decorated with hieroglyphs that moved and changed according to the spiritual condition of approaching visitors. Beneficial souls witnessed inscriptions that provided guidance and encouragement, while those harbouring malevolent intentions saw warnings of the terrible punishments that awaited oathbreakers and defilers of sacred spaces. Sokar himself emerged to greet the solar bark during each nightly passage, his hawk head crowned with elaborate plumes that indicated his authority over the necropolis regions, while his mummified body demonstrated his mastery over the preservation techniques that maintained divine essence throughout the death and resurrection cycle. The god's greeting ritual involved complex exchanges of passwords and recognition signals that verified Ra's identity, while ensuring that no shapeshifting entity could impersonate the sun god to gain unauthorized access to the cavern's secrets. The cavern's interior defied normal spatial relationships, with passages that led simultaneously in multiple directions while maintaining coherent navigation for those who understood the magical principles governing the space. Walls lined with precious metals reflected the bark's passage in ways that created the illusion of infinite vessels travelling through endless tunnels, a defensive mechanism that confused hostile entities while providing legitimate visitors with multiple escape routes should the need arise. The fourth hour brought the bark through the Desert of Knives, where crystalline formations sharp enough to cut through divine substance created a maze of deadly passages that tested both navigation skills and spiritual worthiness. These knife-like structures responded to the moral condition of passing souls, remaining stationary for the righteous while actively seeking to impale those whose hearts carried the weight of unresolved guilt or malicious intentions. The desert sand consisted of ground glass mixed with the powdered bones of entities that had failed to navigate the region successfully, creating an abrasive environment that could wear away inadequate protective spells through prolonged exposure. Wind demons inhabited this region, their invisible forms detectable only through the distinctive whistling sounds they produced, while moving at supernatural speeds through the knife formations. These entities could generate focused air currents, capable of steering vessels into the sharpest crystal edges, while their voices carried hypnotic properties that induced navigation errors in unprepared crews. The demons' primary weakness lay in their inability to maintain coherent form when exposed to direct sunlight, making Ra's presence particularly effective at neutralizing their attacks even in his diminished nocturnal state. The fifth hour presented the Valley of the Serpent, where a massive cobra whose body formed the landscape itself served as both obstacle and testing ground for the solar bark's passage. This creature, distinct from Apep but possessing comparable supernatural power, had coiled its enormous form into configurations that created the valley's hills, ravines, and waterways. The serpent's scales, each one larger than a temple courtyard, provided the only stable footing for travellers attempting to cross the valley on foot, while its periodic movements could reshape the entire landscape without warning. The serpent's consciousness operated according to principles that transcended normal divine psychology, evaluating each passing soul through criteria that remained mysterious even to other deities. Some individuals found the creature completely benign, with its scales forming convenient bridges and ramps that facilitated easy passage through the valley. Others encountered active hostility, as the serpent's movements created insurmountable obstacles while its breath generated toxic clouds that could dissolve spiritual essence on contact. Ra's interaction with the valley serpent required diplomatic skills that complemented his raw divine power, as the creature responded more favourably to respectful acknowledgement of its authority than to attempts at dominance or intimidation. The god's ram-headed form possessed natural advantages in this negotiation, as the curved horns symbolised wisdom and patience, while the weathered features suggested accumulated experience that the serpent found worthy of respect. The sixth hour marked the journey's crucial midpoint, where Ra's bark approached the Hall of Two Truths for his essential meeting with Osiris. This encounter represented far more than a simple diplomatic courtesy between divine colleagues. It constituted the fundamental mechanism through which solar and chthonic powers maintained their cooperative relationship, despite their fundamentally different natures and responsibilities. The meeting occurred within a specially constructed chamber that existed simultaneously within the Hall of Two Truths and aboard the solar bark, allowing both deities to participate without abandoning their primary duties. Osiris appeared for these meetings in his full regalia as Judge of the Dead, his green-tinted skin emphasizing his role as god of vegetation and renewal, while his mummified form demonstrated his mastery over the death and resurrection processes that governed all existence within Duat. The god's throne, carved from black granite and inlaid with gold hieroglyphs, adjusted its position to accommodate the solar bark's arrival, while maintaining the precise orientation required for the cosmic energies that flowed between the two deities during their interaction. The meeting's ritual components included the exchange of vital information about conditions throughout their respective domains, coordination of defensive measures against threats that endangered both solar and underworld regions, and the renewal of magical bonds that maintained cosmic stability during the vulnerable transition periods between night and day. Ra provided intelligence about celestial conditions that might affect the underworld's operations, while Osiris shared observations about spiritual developments among the deceased that could influence the sun's daily resurrection. The two gods also coordinated their responses to Apep's ongoing threat, sharing magical techniques and protective formulas that enhanced their individual defensive capabilities while maintaining the strategic cooperation necessary to defeat the Chaos Serpent's increasingly sophisticated attacks. These discussions occurred in divine languages that transcended normal communication, allowing the exchange of complex magical concepts through direct consciousness transfer rather than conventional speech. The exchange of cosmic intelligence between Ra and Osiris during their nightly meetings served a purpose that extended far beyond divine diplomacy. These encounters generated the fundamental knowledge that would eventually be codified into the most crucial texts ever developed for navigating the afterlife. The collections of spells, formulas, and magical instructions that evolved from the earliest pyramid texts into the comprehensive guidebooks known as the Book of the Dead. This textual evolution reflected the gradual democratization of afterlife knowledge, transforming secrets once reserved for pharaohs into accessible instructions that any properly prepared soul could employ during their journey through Duat. The pyramid texts, carved into the burial chambers of Old Kingdom rulers beginning with Unis around 2375 BCE, represented the earliest systematic attempt to provide the deceased with practical instructions for navigating the underworld's perils. These hieroglyphic inscriptions covered chamber walls with dense columns of text that addressed every conceivable challenge a royal soul might encounter during its transition from earthly kingship to divine existence among the stars. The texts assumed the pharaoh's inherent divinity, while acknowledging that even divine beings required specific knowledge and magical formulas to overcome the obstacles that awaited them in the realm of the dead. The royal nature of these early texts influenced their content significantly, as they focus primarily on transformations that would allow the deceased pharaoh to join Ra's solar bark, or assume positions of authority among the circumplar stars. The spells described elaborate procedures for assuming divine forms, including transformations into falcons that could soar through celestial regions, serpents that could navigate underground passages, and lions that possessed the strength necessary to overcome hostile entities. These metamorphoses required not only magical knowledge, but also the spiritual authority that came with legitimate pharaonic succession. The geographical references within the pyramid texts revealed sophisticated understanding of Duat's layout, with detailed descriptions of landmarks, waterways, and territorial boundaries that allowed royal souls to navigate independently rather than relying entirely on divine guides. The texts identified safe harbours where the deceased could rest during their journey, dangerous regions that required specific protective measures, and alternative routes that could be employed when primary passages became blocked or compromised by hostile forces. However, the pyramid texts also acknowledged the fundamental limitations of written instruction when confronting the dynamic challenges of underworld navigation. Many spells included conditional clauses that provided alternative formulations for different circumstances, recognizing that the deceased might encounter variations on expected themes rather than precisely predicted scenarios. The texts emphasized the importance of understanding underlying principles rather than merely memorizing specific incantations, as successful navigation required adaptive thinking that could respond to novel threats and opportunities. The transition from pyramid text to coffin texts during the Middle Kingdom represented a crucial expansion of afterlife accessibility, as these later compilations extended underworld privileges beyond the royal family to include wealthy nobles, high-ranking officials, and successful merchants who could afford elaborate burial preparations. The coffin texts appeared on the interior surfaces of wooden sarcophagi, creating portable libraries that accompanied the deceased throughout their journey rather than remaining fixed within tomb chambers. This mobility proved essential for souls who might need to reference specific spells while navigating distant regions of Duat. The democratization process reflected changing social structures within Egyptian civilization, as the collapse of centralized royal authority during the first intermediate period created opportunities for regional governors and wealthy private citizens to claim afterlife privileges previously reserved for pharaohs. The coffin texts accommodated this social transformation by developing spell variations that addressed the needs of non-royal souls while maintaining the fundamental magical principles established in the earlier pyramid texts. The expanded accessibility required significant modifications to existing spells, as formulas designed for divine pharaohs needed adaptation for souls lacking inherent royal authority. The coffin texts accomplished this through the development of substitute mechanisms that allowed ordinary individuals to acquire temporary divine status through proper ritual procedures and magical transformations. These substitutions included spells for assuming the identities of specific deities, formulas for claiming kinship with divine beings, and incantations that granted access to celestial regions, normally restricted to royal souls. The geographical knowledge contained within the coffin texts became increasingly detailed and practical, reflecting the experiences of multiple generations of souls who had successfully navigated Duat's challenges and returned information about previously unknown regions and hazards. The texts included updated maps of underworld waterways, revised lists of guardian entities and their specific requirements, and new formulas for overcoming obstacles that had not been addressed in the earlier pyramid texts. The Book of the Dead, known to ancient Egyptians as the Book of Coming Forth by Day, represented the culmination of this textual evolution during the New Kingdom period. These papyrus scrolls provided comprehensive afterlife guidance that could be customized according to individual needs and circumstances, with scribes offering different combinations of spells depending on the deceased's social status, occupation, and specific concerns about their posthumous journey. The standardization of papyrus production during this period made these texts affordable for middle-class Egyptians, further expanding access to crucial afterlife knowledge. The Book of the Dead's organization reflected sophisticated understanding of the afterlife journey's chronological progression, with spells arranged according to the sequence in which souls would likely encounter specific challenges. The opening formulas addressed the immediate disorientation that followed death, providing instructions for maintaining consciousness and identity during the traumatic transition from physical to spiritual existence. These initial spells included techniques for recognizing one's deceased state, methods for establishing communication with divine guides, and procedures for accessing the magical abilities necessary for underworld navigation. The opening of the mouth ceremony occupied a central position within these collections, representing one of the most crucial rituals for ensuring successful afterlife transition. This elaborate procedure required the coordinated efforts of skilled priests, specialized tools crafted from meteorite iron and obsidian, and precise timing that corresponded to specific astronomical configurations. The ceremony's purpose involved restoring the deceased's sensory capabilities and motor functions within their spiritual form, enabling them to see, hear, speak, and move effectively within Duat's supernatural environment. The ritual's complexity reflected its fundamental importance, as souls who fail to undergo proper opening of the mouth procedures face severe handicaps throughout their underworld journey. The ceremony began with the purification of the mummy through washing with sacred oils and the application of protective amulets that would maintain the body's spiritual integrity during the ritual process. Priests employed specialized instruments, including the netjeri knife, Pesesh kef blade, and ritual adze to perform symbolic operations that restored function to specific body parts. The netjeri knife, crafted from iron that had fallen from the sky, possessed the unique ability to cut through the spiritual barriers that prevented deceased souls from accessing their full range of sensory capabilities. The priest conducting the ceremony would touch this blade to the mummy's mouth, eyes, ears, and nostrils while reciting formulas that activated the corresponding spiritual organs within the deceased's transformed body. The process required extreme precision, as incorrect application of the blade could damage the soul's essential nature rather than enhancing its capabilities. The Pesesh kef blade, fashioned from flint and shaped to resemble a fishtail, served to open the deceased's mouth for speech and consumption of spiritual nourishment. This tool's fish symbolism connected it to the primordial waters of creation, allowing it to channel the life-giving forces that had originally brought consciousness into existence. The priest would use the Pesesh kef to trace specific patterns around the mummy's mouth while reciting incantations that granted the deceased the ability to speak divine languages and consume the ethereal foods available within the field of reeds. The ritual adze, constructed from copper and blessed through exposure to stellar radiation, restored the deceased's capacity for purposeful movement within their spiritual form. This tool's blade could carve through the invisible restraints that bound newly deceased souls to their physical remains, freeing them to begin their journey through Duat's various regions. The priest would employ the adze to make symbolic cuts around the mummy's joints while reciting formulas that granted supernatural mobility and the ability to assume alternative forms when circumstances required such transformations. The ceremony's culmination involved the presentation of offerings that would sustain the deceased during their initial adjustment to afterlife conditions. These offerings included bread baked from grain that had been blessed by solar radiation, beer brewed from barley that had grown in temple gardens, and meat from animals that had been ritually purified before sacrifice. The spiritual essence of these foods would accompany the deceased throughout their journey, providing emergency sustenance during periods when other sources of nourishment might be unavailable. The transformation spells contained within the Book of the Dead addressed the crucial ability to assume alternative forms when faced with specific challenges or opportunities during the underworld journey. These metamorphoses required detailed knowledge of each creature's essential characteristics, behavioral patterns, and magical properties, as incomplete or inaccurate transformations could trap souls within inappropriate forms or expose them to dangers they were unprepared to handle. The spell for transforming into a falcon granted souls the ability to soar above Duat's terrestrial hazards while gaining access to aerial perspectives that revealed hidden pathways and potential ambush sites. The transformation required precise visualization of falcon anatomy combined with incantations that invoked the protective power of Horus, the divine falcon whose mastery of flight encompassed both physical and spiritual dimensions. Souls assuming falcon form gained enhanced vision that could penetrate illusions and detect supernatural entities attempting to remain hidden, while their aerial mobility allowed them to bypass ground-based obstacles and predators. However, the falcon transformation also imposed specific limitations and vulnerabilities that souls needed to understand before attempting the metamorphosis. Falcon form souls became susceptible to attacks from larger aerial predators, including supernatural eagles and hawks that served hostile entities within certain regions of Duat. Additionally, the transformation's duration was limited by the soul's spiritual energy reserves, making it unsuitable for extended travel or prolonged combat situations. The Serpent transformation spell provided souls with the ability to navigate narrow passages and underground tunnels that might otherwise prove inaccessible, while also granting immunity to many forms of poison and venom that threatened travellers in certain regions of the underworld. The metamorphosis required detailed knowledge of serpent physiology and behaviour patterns, as souls assuming snake form needed to understand how to move effectively without limbs while maintaining their essential human consciousness and decision-making capabilities. The spell's incantations invoke the protective power of various serpent deities, including Wadjet, the cobra goddess who protected Lower Egypt, and Renenutet, the harvest serpent who ensured agricultural abundance. These divine connections provided transformed souls with access to serpentine magical abilities, including the capacity to detect vibrations through ground contact, the ability to unhinge their jaws for consuming large objects, and resistance to crushing forces that might otherwise prove fatal. The lion transformation granted souls tremendous physical strength and courage, necessary for confronting hostile entities that could not be avoided or circumvented through alternative routes. Lions held special significance in Egyptian religious thought as symbols of royal power and divine authority, making this transformation particularly effective for souls who needed to assert dominance over lesser supernatural beings or claim access to restricted areas within Duat's hierarchy. The metamorphosis required invocation of lion deities including Sekhmet, the lioness goddess of war and healing, and Mahes, the lion god who served as protector of sacred spaces. These divine connections provided transformed souls with enhanced combat abilities, including claws that could tear through supernatural materials, roars that could paralyze enemies with fear, and predatory instincts that revealed the most effective tactics for overcoming specific opponents. The navigation formulas contained within the Book of the Dead provided detailed instructions for traversing Duat's complex geography while avoiding the numerous hazards that threatened unprepared souls. These formulas included techniques for reading the supernatural landmarks that indicated safe passages, methods for interpreting the behavior of indigenous creatures that could signal approaching dangers, and procedures for establishing temporary shelters when extended rest became necessary during the journey. The spell for not dying again in the underworld represented one of the most crucial protections available to souls navigating Duat's perils. This formula addressed the terrifying possibility of experiencing a second death within the realm of the dead, a fate that resulted in complete spiritual annihilation rather than mere return to unconscious existence. The second death could occur through various mechanisms, including consumption by hostile entities, dissolution in regions of primordial chaos, or failure to maintain spiritual coherence during extended exposure to underworld conditions. The protective spell established multiple layers of defense against second death, beginning with techniques for reinforcing the soul's essential identity and preventing the gradual erosion of consciousness that could occur during prolonged underworld residence. The formula included visualization exercises that strengthened the deceased's self-image, memory techniques that preserved crucial personal information, and meditation practices that maintained connection to the fundamental life force that sustained all existence. The spell also provided specific countermeasures against the various entities and conditions that could inflict second death upon unprepared souls. These protections included barriers that prevented hostile creatures from making direct contact with the soul's essential core, purification techniques that neutralized corrupting influences before they could cause permanent damage, and escape procedures that allowed rapid withdrawal from situations that exceeded the soul's defensive capabilities. The magical knowledge required for successful underworld navigation extended far beyond spell memorization to encompass detailed understanding of the supernatural politics and territorial boundaries that governed different regions of Duat. Souls needed to learn the secret names of numerous guardian entities, as these beings would only grant passage to individuals who could demonstrate appropriate respect through correct identification and address. The names themselves possessed magical power that could compel cooperation from reluctant guardians, while providing protection against entities that might otherwise prove hostile. The password systems that controlled access to various gates and barriers throughout Duat required souls to demonstrate not only knowledge of specific words and phrases, but also understanding of the underlying concepts and relationships that gave these formulas their power. Guards could detect attempts to use passwords without proper comprehension, making rote memorization insufficient for gaining access to restricted areas. Successful navigation required genuine understanding of the magical principles that governed each barrier's operation. The proper responses to divine challenges demanded sophisticated knowledge of Egyptian theology, mythology, and religious lore, as souls might face questions about obscure historical events, complex theological concepts, or subtle interpretations of moral principles. The challenges served multiple purposes, including verification of the soul's cultural identity, assessment of their spiritual preparation, and evaluation of their worthiness to proceed to more privileged regions of the afterlife. Incorrect responses could result in redirection to remedial areas where souls could acquire necessary knowledge through extended study and purification. The comprehensive magical knowledge contained within the Book of the Dead served its ultimate purpose when souls finally faced the consequences of their earthly actions within Duat's carefully structured system of divine justice. The underworld's punitive mechanisms operated according to principles that transcended simple retribution, creating a complex hierarchy of consequences designed to address different categories of moral failure while maintaining opportunities for redemption and spiritual growth. The severity and duration of punishments corresponded precisely to the nature and extent of each soul's transgressions, with divine judges employing supernatural perception to evaluate not only specific actions, but also the underlying intentions and circumstances that had motivated them. Minor transgressions received correspondingly measured responses that emphasized correction rather than destruction. Souls guilty of petty theft, occasional dishonesty, or failures of courtesy faced temporary restrictions on their movement within Duat's more pleasant regions, while undergoing educational programs designed to develop proper understanding of Ma'at's principles. These corrective measures took place within specially constructed chambers that resembled earthly schools, but possessed supernatural properties that accelerated learning and ensured perfect retention of moral lessons. The walls of these educational facilities displayed constantly changing hieroglyphic texts that illustrated the cosmic consequences of various actions, while the floors consisted of crystallized memories that allowed souls to experience directly the effects their behavior had produced on others during earthly existence. The teaching methods employed within these corrective facilities utilized techniques that engaged every aspect of the soul's consciousness, making superficial compliance impossible while encouraging genuine transformation of character and values. Divine instructors, typically consisting of purified souls who had successfully completed their own moral education, guided newly arrived students through comprehensive curricula that addressed both theoretical understanding of ethical principles and practical application of virtuous behavior in challenging situations. The instruction process continued until each soul demonstrated not merely knowledge of correct responses, but authentic commitment to righteous conduct that would persist throughout their eternal existence. Souls guilty of more serious offences faced increasingly severe consequences that reflected the greater damage their actions had inflicted upon cosmic order. Those convicted of fraud, adultery, or abuse of authority encountered punishments that involved temporary loss of their human form, forcing them to exist as lower creatures until they developed genuine appreciation for the suffering their behaviour had caused others. The transformation process operated according to the principle of poetic justice, with each soul assuming the form of an animal whose natural behaviour most closely resembled their moral failings during earthly existence. Fraudulent merchants might find themselves transformed into jackals, forced to scavenge for sustenance while experiencing the insecurity and desperation that their dishonest practices had inflicted upon their victims. Adulterous spouses could become serpents, compelled to crawl upon the ground while losing the capacity for the intimate relationships they had corrupted through their betrayals. Officials who had abused their authority faced transformation into insects, experiencing powerlessness and vulnerability that taught them empathy for those they had oppressed during their mortal careers. These animal transformations lasted for periods calculated to provide thorough education in humility and compassion, with the duration determined by each soul's progress toward genuine repentance and moral understanding. Some souls required only brief periods in animal form before demonstrating authentic transformation, while others needed extended experience of vulnerability and dependence before abandoning the pride and selfishness that had motivated their original transgressions. The transformation process itself proved reversible once souls achieved genuine moral growth, but attempts to fake repentance or manipulate the system resulted in extension of the punishment period and assumption of even less desirable forms. The intermediate levels of punishment addressed souls whose crimes had caused significant harm to others, while stopping short of the most heinous offences that merited complete destruction. These individuals faced confinement within specialised regions of Duat, where they experienced conditions that directly reflected the nature of their earthly crimes. Murderers found themselves trapped within chambers filled with the anguished voices of their victims, forced to listen continuously to expressions of pain and grief while contemplating the full consequences of their violent actions. The chamber's acoustics amplified these sounds until they became overwhelming, creating psychological pressure that eventually broke down the defensive rationalizations that had allowed the murderers to justify their behaviour. Thieves faced imprisonment within vaults, where they were surrounded by representations of everything they had stolen during their earthly existence, but remained unable to touch or possess any of these objects. The tantalizing proximity of desired goods, combined with the absolute impossibility of acquisition, created a form of torment specifically designed to address the acquisitive desires that had motivated their criminal behavior. The punishment continued until the thieves developed genuine understanding of contentment and appreciation for non-material sources of satisfaction. Those guilty of religious sacrilege encountered punishments that involved exposure to the full glory of divine presence without the protective barriers that normally shielded mortal consciousness from overwhelming spiritual intensity. The experience proved simultaneously terrifying and enlightening as souls faced direct confrontation with the sacred forces they had mocked or defiled during their earthly existence. The divine radiance burned away their cynicism and disrespect, while revealing the profound beauty and meaning that their sacrilegious behavior had prevented them from perceiving during mortal life. The most severe punishments short of complete annihilation involved assignment to labor gangs that performed essential maintenance work throughout Duat's infrastructure under the supervision of divine overseers who possessed infinite patience but absolutely no tolerance for continued misconduct. These work assignments lasted for periods measured in millennia rather than years, with souls gradually earning improved conditions through demonstrated commitment to productive labor and cooperative behavior. The work itself served multiple purposes, providing necessary services for Duat's operation, while teaching valuable lessons about the dignity of honest labor and the satisfaction that came from contributing to the common good. The Lake of Fire represented the most complex and paradoxical element within Duat's system of divine justice, serving simultaneously as a place of punishment for the irredeemably wicked and a source of purification for souls capable of redemption. This vast body of molten gold extended across distances that exceeded the largest earthly lakes, its surface maintaining temperatures that could instantly vaporize normal matter while possessing supernatural properties that affected spiritual essence according to each soul's moral condition. The lake's shores consisted of crystallized flame that provided stable footing for authorized personnel while remaining impassable for souls attempting unauthorized access. For souls burdened with serious but not irredeemable moral corruption, the Lake of Fire offered purification processes that burned away accumulated spiritual contamination while preserving the essential core of identity and consciousness that made continued existence meaningful. These souls entered the lake's golden flames voluntarily, guided by divine attendants who monitored their progress and provided assistance during particularly challenging phases of the purification process. The flames consumed negative influences, including pride, hatred, greed, and fear, while strengthening positive qualities such as compassion, wisdom, courage, and love. The purification process occurred gradually, allowing souls to adjust to each stage of spiritual refinement without experiencing trauma that might damage their psychological stability. Divine healers stationed around the lake's perimeter provided medical and emotional support for souls undergoing purification, while spiritual counselors offered guidance that helped them understand the changes occurring within their consciousness. The duration of purification varied according to each soul's specific needs, with some requiring brief exposure while others underwent extended treatment that addressed deep-seated character flaws accumulated over multiple lifetimes. However, souls whose corruption exceeded the boundaries of redemption faced a very different fate when confronted with the Lake of Fire's supernatural flames. For these irredeemably wicked individuals, the golden fire served as an instrument of complete destruction that dissolved their spiritual essence entirely, eliminating them from existence so thoroughly that no trace of their identity remained within the cosmic record. This ultimate punishment, known as the Second Death, applied only to souls whose evil had become so fundamental to their nature that purification would require destroying their essential identity, making continued existence meaningless. The criteria for determining which souls face purification versus annihilation remained mysterious even to most divine entities, as the decisions involved evaluation of factors that transcended normal understanding of moral psychology. Some souls guilty of terrible crimes proved capable of redemption through proper treatment, while others whose offences appeared relatively minor contained corruption so deep that no amount of purification could restore them to spiritual health. The divine judges responsible for these determinations possessed supernatural insight that could perceive the ultimate potential for good or evil within each soul's fundamental nature. The blessed souls who successfully navigated Duat's challenges and passed the weighing of the heart gained access to the field of reeds, known in Egyptian as Seket Aru, which represented the ultimate reward for righteous living and proper spiritual preparation. This paradisiacal realm existed as a perfected version of Egypt itself, featuring all the geographical and cultural elements that had made earthly existence meaningful while eliminating the limitations, uncertainties and sufferings that had constrained mortal life. The field of reeds stretched beyond normal spatial boundaries, providing each resident with exactly the type of environment they found most conducive to eternal happiness, while maintaining the communal aspects that gave Egyptian civilization its distinctive character. The realm's agricultural regions produced crops of supernatural abundance without requiring the back-breaking labour that had characterized farming during earthly existence. Barley and wheat grew to heights that exceeded the tallest earthly varieties while developing grain that possessed enhanced nutritional properties and flavours that surpassed anything available to mortal palates. The harvesting process occurred through gentle gathering that left the plants intact for immediate regrowth, ensuring continuous availability of fresh food without depleting natural resources or disrupting ecological balance. The Nile's heavenly counterpart flowed through the field of reeds with waters that possessed healing properties capable of curing any ailment while providing perfect irrigation for agricultural activities. The river's annual flood cycle continued, but operated with supernatural precision that eliminated the uncertainty and potential destruction that had sometimes accompanied earthly inundations. Fish of incredible size and beauty populated these sacred waters, their flesh providing sustenance that satisfied both physical hunger and spiritual longing, while their scales reflected colours that had never existed in mortal realms. Cities within the field of reeds combined the architectural achievements of every historical period while incorporating design elements that transcended earthly engineering limitations. Buildings rose to heights that defied normal structural principles while maintaining perfect stability and comfort for their inhabitants. The streets remained perpetually clean and well-maintained without requiring manual labour, while public spaces featured gardens that bloomed eternally with flowers whose fragrances could induce states of profound peace and contentment in all who encountered them. The social structure within the field of reeds reflected idealized versions of earthly relationships, while eliminating the conflicts and inequalities that had created suffering during mortal existence. Families reunited with deceased relatives experienced joy that exceeded any happiness they had known during earthly life, while friendships formed between souls who shared common interests and values regardless of their original historical periods or social backgrounds. The absence of scarcity eliminated competition for resources, while the abundance of meaningful activities ensured that every resident could pursue their interests without interfering with others' enjoyment. The transformation into an equipped spirit, known in Egyptian as AKH, represented the culmination of successful navigation through Duat's challenges and proper preparation during both earthly existence and the afterlife journey. This transformation involved fundamental changes to the soul's nature, that granted capabilities far exceeding those possessed during mortal life, while maintaining essential aspects of individual identity and personality. The process required perfect integration of the soul's various components, including the Ka, Ba, and Ren, into a unified spiritual entity capable of existing simultaneously in multiple realms. The preparation required for achieving AKH status began during earthly existence through adherence to Ma'at's principles, participation in proper religious observances, and accumulation of the knowledge necessary for navigating Duat's challenges. Individuals who lived righteously while maintaining appropriate relationships with divine forces developed spiritual strength that proved essential for surviving the underworld's trials. Those who neglected their religious duties or violated moral principles faced corresponding difficulties during their afterlife journey, as their weakened spiritual condition left them vulnerable to the various dangers that threatened unprepared souls. The mummification process played a crucial role in preparing the physical form for potential resurrection and transformation into AKH status. Proper preservation techniques maintain the body's capacity to serve as a vessel for the returning soul, while protecting it from decay and corruption that might compromise the resurrection process. The quality of mummification materials and procedures directly affected the success probability of afterlife transformation, making adequate burial preparations essential for anyone seeking eternal existence among the blessed dead. The funerary texts and magical equipment placed within tombs provided essential tools for navigating Duat's challenges, while supplying the passwords, spells, and protective formulas necessary for successful completion of the afterlife journey. Tombs lacking adequate textual provisions left their occupants at severe disadvantage when confronting the underworld's various obstacles, while those supplied with comprehensive magical libraries gave their residents significant advantages during crucial encounters with divine judges and supernatural guardians. The social and economic factors that determined access to proper burial preparations created significant disparities in afterlife prospects between wealthy and poor Egyptians. Individuals who could afford elaborate tombs, high-quality mummification, and extensive collections of funerary texts possessed substantial advantages over those whose families lacked resources for adequate burial preparations. However, the moral requirements for achieving AKH status remained constant regardless of economic circumstances, ensuring that righteous behavior during earthly existence retained primary importance for determining ultimate spiritual fate. The divine judges who evaluated souls represented only the most benevolent entities within Duat's vast supernatural ecosystem. Beyond the ordered courts and measured punishments of divine justice, lurked creatures whose existence served darker purposes within the cosmic balance. These beings emerged from the primordial chaos that predated creation itself, embodying forces so ancient and alien that even the gods approached them with caution. Their presence throughout the underworld served essential functions in testing souls and maintaining cosmic equilibrium, yet their methods often proved terrifying to unprepared spirits navigating the realm of the dead. The Eaters of Blood constituted perhaps the most feared category of demonic entities within Duat, creatures whose very existence depended upon consuming the life essence that flowed through both living and deceased beings. These demons appeared as grotesquely distorted humanoid figures standing between 8 and 12 cubits tall, their elongated limbs ending in claws capable of tearing through spiritual substance as easily as mortal flesh. Their faces combined human and animal features in disturbing configurations, wolf-like muzzles filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth, eyes that glowed with internal fire, and ears that could detect the faintest traces of fear or weakness in approaching souls. The demon's skin possessed a translucent quality that revealed a network of blood vessels beneath, vessels that pulsed with the stolen life force of their victims. Fresh feeding caused these creatures to glow with ruddy light that could be seen from great distances, serving as a warning to other inhabitants of the underworld, while advertising their successful hunts to potential rivals. Their hunger never abated, as the supernatural nature of their existence required constant replenishment of stolen vitality to maintain their coherent forms within Duat's harsh environment. These entities inhabited the borderlands between different regions of the underworld, establishing territories around natural choke points where souls travelling between areas became vulnerable to ambush. They constructed elaborate lairs within caverns and ruins, decorating these spaces with the preserved remains of their victims, arranged in patterns that served both as trophies and as components in dark rituals that enhanced their predatory abilities. The walls of these lairs wept constantly with blood that never dried, creating an atmosphere of perpetual horror that weakened the resolve of any soul unfortunate enough to enter their domain. The Eaters of Blood employed hunting strategies that combined supernatural stealth with psychological warfare, designed to paralyze their prey with terror. They could render themselves nearly invisible by bending light around their forms, allowing them to approach within striking distance before revealing their presence. Their voices possessed hypnotic properties that could induce temporary paralysis in victims while they positioned themselves for devastating attacks. The demons particularly enjoyed stalking souls who displayed excessive pride or arrogance, viewing such individuals as especially satisfying prey whose downfall provided both nourishment and entertainment. Combat with these creatures required not only magical protection, but also tremendous courage and spiritual strength, as their mere presence could drain confidence from even experienced souls. Their claws inflicted wounds that continued bleeding indefinitely unless treated with specific healing techniques known only to certain divine entities. The blood loss from these injuries proved particularly dangerous because it represented the gradual depletion of the victim's essential life force rather than mere physical damage. Souls who survived encounters with the Eaters of Blood often required extensive recovery periods, during which they remained vulnerable to other predators attracted by their weakened condition. The demons' weakness lay in their addiction to blood consumption, which made them predictable in their behaviour patterns while creating opportunities for clever souls to exploit their obsessive nature. Properly prepared travellers could distract these creatures by offering small amounts of their own blood as tribute, buying time to escape while the demons became intoxicated by the feeding process. However, this strategy carried significant risks, as souls who offered too much blood might find themselves too weakened to continue their journey, while those who provided too little risked enraging the demons and provoking more aggressive pursuit. Those who live on putrefaction represented an even more disturbing category of underworld inhabitants, creatures whose existence depended upon consuming the spiritual corruption that accumulated within souls who had lived lives of moral degradation. These beings appeared as bloated, corpulent figures whose flesh showed advanced stages of decay, while somehow maintaining animation and predatory intelligence. Their bodies constantly leaked foul-smelling fluids that could contaminate the surrounding environment, making their territories recognizable from considerable distances by the overwhelming stench of spiritual rot. The creatures' faces bore only minimal resemblance to human features, with most details obscured by layers of putrid flesh that shifted and reformed constantly as they consumed new sources of corruption. Their mouths opened far wider than natural anatomy should allow, revealing gullets lined with rows of grinding teeth designed for processing the toughest spiritual substances. Their eyes appeared as deep pits filled with swirling darkness that could perceive the moral condition of approaching souls with perfect accuracy, allowing them to identify the most corrupt individuals from vast distances. These demons established their territories in regions of Duat where failed souls underwent punishment for their earthly crimes, feeding on the spiritual waste products generated by divine justice processes. They served as a form of cosmic sanitation system, preventing the accumulation of moral corruption that might otherwise contaminate the underworld's environment and threaten the spiritual health of righteous souls. Their presence near punishment facilities provided additional deterrent effects, as souls witnessing their feeding activities gained visceral understanding of the consequences awaiting those who persisted in evil behaviour. The creature's feeding process involved literally consuming the corrupted portions of souls undergoing purification, extracting negative qualities like hatred, greed, and cruelty, while leaving behind the potentially redeemable aspects of each individual's spiritual essence. This selective consumption required sophisticated understanding of moral psychology, combined with supernatural digestive capabilities that could separate beneficial from harmful spiritual components. The demons' bodies served as processing facilities where consumed corruption underwent transformation into less dangerous forms that could be safely expelled into regions of primordial chaos. Those who live on putrefaction pose minimal direct threat to righteous souls, as their dietary preferences focused exclusively on spiritual corruption rather than general life force. However, their presence created psychological challenges for souls undergoing moral evaluation, as witnessing their feeding activities could induce despair and self-doubt that interfered with the purification process. The creature's appearance served as a stark reminder of the ultimate consequences of moral failure, motivating souls to embrace genuine repentance rather than superficial compliance with divine expectations. The demons' territories featured landscapes that reflected their dietary preferences, with ground composed of crystallized moral corruption and atmospheric conditions that amplified negative emotions while suppressing positive feelings. Rivers of liquid shame flowed through these regions, their waters carrying the dissolved remnants of countless failed souls toward collection points where the creatures gathered to feed. The very air in these areas possessed corrosive properties that could erode spiritual substance from souls lacking adequate protection, making extended residence dangerous even for those not directly targeted by the demons themselves. Beyond these specialized feeders lurked entities whose roles in the underworld's ecosystem proved even more complex and disturbing. The Guardians of Forbidden Regions served as sentinels protecting areas of Duat that contained knowledge or power too dangerous for unauthorized access. These beings combined human intelligence with animal instincts and divine authority, creating formidable obstacles for souls attempting to explore beyond their designated pathways through the realm of the dead. The most prominent of these guardians appeared as massive sphinxes whose bodies incorporated elements from multiple animal species, while maintaining distinctly Egyptian characteristics. Their lion bodies provided tremendous physical strength and predatory instincts, while their human heads possessed intelligence that exceeded most divine entities. Wings of eagles or hawks granted them aerial mobility that allowed rapid response to intrusions anywhere within their territories, while serpentine tails equipped with venomous stingers provided additional weapons for subduing persistent trespassers. These composite beings possessed the ability to pose riddles and intellectual challenges that tested not only knowledge but wisdom and moral understanding. Souls who answered correctly gained passage to restricted areas where they could access advanced spiritual teachings and magical techniques unavailable through normal afterlife progression. Those who failed faced consequences ranging from temporary banishment to complete destruction, depending on the nature of their attempted transgression and their demonstrated worthiness for second chances. The Guardian's riddles often addressed fundamental questions about the nature of existence, the relationship between order and chaos, and the proper balance between individual desires and cosmic responsibility. These challenges required souls to demonstrate not merely factual knowledge, but genuine understanding of complex philosophical concepts that govern the universe's operation. The questioning process could continue for extended periods, with Guardians probing ever deeper into applicants' comprehension of spiritual principles until they achieved complete confidence in their evaluation. The forbidden regions protected by these entities contained some of the most dangerous knowledge and artifacts within the entire underworld. Ancient weapons capable of destroying divine beings lay stored within heavily warded vaults, while libraries contained spells that could reshape reality according to the wielder's will. Laboratories where the gods conducted experiments in creation and destruction required constant monitoring to prevent unauthorized access that might result in cosmic catastrophe. The Guardian's vigilance ensured that such power remained available only to entities possessing the wisdom and moral authority necessary for responsible use. The serpentine inhabitants of Duat's waterways represented another category of supernatural beings whose existence served essential functions within the underworld's complex ecosystem. Beyond the Chaos Serpent Apep, whose opposition to cosmic order made it a unique entity, countless other serpentine creatures populated the rivers, lakes, and underground streams that provided Duat's water supply. These beings range from protective entities that guided souls safely across dangerous waters to predatory monsters that viewed travelers as convenient meals during their aquatic journeys. The protective Uraeus serpents served as benevolent guardians for souls who demonstrated proper respect for divine authority and cosmic order. These creatures appeared as cobras of moderate size, whose scales gleamed with golden light that could illuminate dark passages while providing warmth and comfort to travellers navigating cold underground waterways. Their hoods displayed the sacred eye of Ra, marking them as official representatives of solar authority within the aquatic regions of the underworld. These beneficial serpents possessed the ability to calm turbulent waters and create safe passages through otherwise impassable currents, while their presence deterred hostile aquatic creatures from attacking souls under their protection. They could extend their bodies to form temporary bridges across narrow streams, or coil themselves into boat-like configurations that provided transportation for souls lacking their own vessels. Their knowledge of underwater geography proved invaluable for souls seeking alternative routes through Duat's complex waterway system. The Uraeus serpents communicated through a combination of hissing sounds and telepathic impressions that conveyed complex navigational information directly into the consciousness of souls they chose to assist. Their guidance included warnings about dangerous areas, recommendations for safe camping sites, and instructions for performing the rituals necessary to gain passage through magically protected barriers. These creatures required no payment for their assistance beyond proper acknowledgement of their divine authority and respectful treatment during the period of their aid. However, the same waterways that hosted these beneficial entities also contained predatory serpents, whose hunting strategies posed significant threats to unprepared souls. The Devourers of the Deep measured over 200 cubits in length, their massive bodies capable of swallowing entire boats along with their crews. These creatures possessed supernatural camouflage abilities that allowed them to blend perfectly with the murky waters they inhabited, making detection nearly impossible until they struck with lightning speed at unsuspecting prey. The predatory serpent's scales possessed razor-sharp edges that could slice through magical barriers and divine protections, while their fangs dripped venom that induced paralysis followed by gradual dissolution of spiritual substance. Their hunting technique involved creating whirlpools that drew victims toward their waiting jaws while preventing escape through conventional swimming or magical flight. The creatures could remain motionless for centuries while waiting for suitable prey, their patience exceeding that of any mortal consciousness. These aquatic predators served important ecological functions by controlling populations of lesser supernatural creatures that might otherwise overrun certain regions of the underworld. Their presence forced souls to develop proper caution and preparation before attempting water crossings, while their selective predation removed individuals whose spiritual weakness made them unsuitable for continued existence within Duat's challenging environment. The fear they inspired encouraged souls to seek divine protection and guidance, rather than relying solely on their own abilities during dangerous passages. The hybrid creatures that populated various regions of Duat represented perhaps the most complex category of supernatural beings within the underworld's ecosystem. These entities combined human, animal, and divine characteristics and configurations that reflected their specific roles within cosmic order, while demonstrating the fluid nature of identity within spiritual realms. Their composite forms allowed them to serve multiple functions simultaneously, acting as obstacles for some souls while providing assistance to others, depending on the circumstances of each encounter. The most prominent hybrids appeared as creatures with human torsos and heads, combined with animal bodies and limbs that granted specialized capabilities for their designated functions. Lion-bodied entities possess the strength and courage necessary for confronting hostile forces, while bird-bodied creatures could traverse aerial regions inaccessible to ground-bound souls. Serpent-bodied hybrids demonstrated flexibility and stealth that made them effective scouts and messengers, while those with crocodile bodies could navigate both terrestrial and aquatic environments with equal facility. These composite beings possessed intelligence that varied according to their specific roles and responsibilities within the underworld's hierarchy. Some functioned as relatively simple guardians whose duties required only basic decision-making capabilities, while others served as complex administrators whose responsibilities demanded sophisticated understanding of divine law and cosmic principles. The most advanced hybrids possessed wisdom that rivaled major deities, making them valuable advisors for souls seeking guidance during particularly challenging phases of their afterlife journey. The hybrid creature's moral responsiveness revealed a fundamental truth about the Egyptian underworld that transcended individual punishment or reward. Every soul's journey through Duat participated in the vast cosmic machinery that maintained universal order. The composite beings served as living embodiments of this interconnection, their shifting loyalties reflecting the dynamic relationship between personal spiritual development and the health of creation itself. When a soul achieved purification and moral growth, their transformation strengthened the entire cosmic system, while spiritual corruption threatened not only the individual, but the stability of existence at every level. This interconnection between individual resurrection and cosmic renewal manifested most clearly in the relationship between each soul's afterlife journey and the greater cycles of nature that governed Egyptian civilization. The annual flooding of the Nile, which brought life-giving water and fertile silt to Egypt's agricultural regions, operated according to the same fundamental principles that governed death and rebirth in the underworld. Just as the river's waters receded each year to reveal renewed soil capable of supporting abundant crops, souls who successfully navigated Duat's challenges emerged transformed and purified, ready to contribute to the cosmic order that sustained all existence. The agricultural symbolism extended beyond simple metaphor to encompass the actual mechanisms through which individual spiritual development affected universal processes. Each soul that achieved successful resurrection added its purified essence to the cosmic reservoir of Ma'at, strengthening the fundamental forces that maintained order throughout creation. Conversely, souls that succumbed to corruption or faced annihilation through the second death created corresponding deficits in cosmic stability that required compensation through increased vigilance and effort from surviving righteous entities. The priests who maintained Egypt's temples understood this relationship intimately, recognizing that their ritual activities served not merely local religious needs, but the fundamental requirements of cosmic maintenance. The daily offerings presented to various deities provided spiritual sustenance that enabled divine entities to continue their essential functions within the universal order, while the complex ceremonies that marked seasonal transitions helped synchronize earthly activities with celestial processes that governed the afterlife realm. The mortuary priests who performed mummification and burial rites occupied particularly crucial positions within this cosmic system, as their technical expertise directly affected each soul's prospects for successful resurrection. The quality of preservation techniques, the accuracy of ritual procedures, and the completeness of magical provisions could determine whether individual souls achieved eternal existence or faced spiritual destruction. These specialists understood that their work contributed not only to their clients' personal welfare, but to the overall health of the cosmic order that depended upon maintaining adequate populations of purified souls within the underworld's blessed regions. The concept of the beautiful West emerged from this understanding of death as transformation rather than termination. The western horizon, where the sun disappeared each evening before beginning its nightly journey through Duat, served as the symbolic gateway to a realm where apparent endings became opportunities for renewal and growth. Souls who approached death with proper preparation and moral worthiness could anticipate not punishment or mere reward, but fundamental transformation into more perfect versions of themselves that retained individual identity while gaining enhanced capabilities for contributing to cosmic harmony. The beautiful West encompassed not only the field of reeds, where successful souls enjoyed eternal existence, but also the entire process of spiritual development that occurred throughout Duat's various regions. Even souls undergoing punishment or purification participated in this transformative process, as their suffering served to burn away corrupting influences while strengthening whatever positive qualities remained within their essential nature. The underworld's harsh conditions and terrifying inhabitants functioned as spiritual refineries that separated beneficial from harmful elements within each soul's complex psychological structure. The transformation process operated according to principles that transcended simple moral accounting to address the fundamental nature of consciousness and identity. Souls who achieved successful resurrection did not merely receive rewards for good behavior during earthly existence, but underwent actual changes in their essential nature that enhanced their capacity for wisdom, compassion, and creative contribution to cosmic order. These changes proved irreversible once achieved, making the transformed souls permanently immune to the corrupting influences that had threatened them during their mortal careers. The role of the deceased in maintaining cosmic order extended far beyond their personal enjoyment of eternal existence to encompass active participation in the ongoing struggle between Ma'at and Isfet that define the universe's fundamental structure. Successful souls joined Ra's nightly voyage through the underworld, adding their purified essence to the solar bark's defensive capabilities while contributing specialized knowledge and abilities acquired during their earthly existence and afterlife journey. Each soul brought unique capabilities to this cosmic defense force, with farmers contributing understanding of agricultural cycles that helped maintain the supernatural fertility of the field of reeds, while craftsmen provided technical expertise that assisted in maintaining and improving the complex magical infrastructure that supported the underworld's operations. Priests offered ritual knowledge that enhanced the effectiveness of protective ceremonies, while scribes contributed record-keeping abilities that helped track the moral development of newly deceased souls and coordinate the complex administrative requirements of divine justice. Military personnel who had served with honor during their earthly careers found themselves particularly valuable as participants in the eternal struggle against Apep and other forces of primordial chaos that threatened cosmic stability. These souls retained their tactical knowledge and combat experience, while gaining supernatural abilities that made them formidable opponents for entities that might otherwise overwhelm purely divine defenders. The human perspective provided insights into strategic thinking that complemented the cosmic awareness possessed by traditional deities. The participation of the deceased souls in Ra's nightly journey created a dynamic system where individual spiritual development directly enhanced the collective security of all existence. Each soul that achieved successful transformation strengthened the forces of order while reducing the influence of chaotic elements that sought to undermine cosmic stability. This relationship encouraged continued moral development among both living and deceased individuals, as everyone understood that their personal choices affected not only their own fate, but the welfare of the entire universe. The daily defeat of chaos required constant vigilance and effort from all participants in the cosmic order, as the forces of Isfet possessed inexhaustible energy and cunning that could exploit any weakness or complacency among their opponents. The Chaos Serpent Apep represented only the most visible manifestation of these destructive forces, which operated at every level of existence through countless agents and influences that sought to corrupt, weaken, or destroy the structures that maintained universal harmony. The battle against chaos occurred not only during Ra's nightly voyage through this underworld, but throughout every aspect of existence, as the forces of order and disorder competed for influence over natural processes, human behaviour, and divine activities. Successful souls contributed to this struggle through their very existence as purified entities whose presence strengthened Mayat while providing examples of successful transformation that inspired both living and deceased individuals to pursue righteous conduct. The ultimate goal of the Egyptian afterlife journey involved achieving unity with the divine while maintaining individual identity, a paradoxical accomplishment that represented the highest possible spiritual development within the cosmic system. This transformation, described as becoming one with Ra yet remaining oneself, required souls to transcend the limitations of mortal consciousness while preserving the unique perspectives and capabilities that made their individual contributions valuable to the cosmic order. The process of achieving divine unity began during earthly existence through adherence to Ma'at's principles and participation in religious observances that gradually aligned individual will with cosmic harmony. Souls who successfully completed this preliminary development found themselves better prepared for the challenges of underworld navigation, while those who neglected their spiritual responsibilities faced correspondingly greater difficulties during their afterlife journey. The transformation into divine unity occurred gradually throughout the soul's progress through Duat's various regions, with each successfully completed challenge contributing to the gradual dissolution of ego boundaries that separated individual consciousness from universal awareness. However, this dissolution did not result in the loss of personal identity, but rather in the expansion of individual consciousness to encompass cosmic perspectives while retaining the unique characteristics that defined each soul's essential nature. Souls who achieved this ultimate transformation gained the ability to exist simultaneously in multiple realms and time periods, participating in cosmic processes that extended far beyond the immediate concerns of individual existence. They could contribute to the maintenance of natural cycles, assist in the guidance of newly deceased souls, and participate in the ongoing creation of new realities that expanded the universe's capacity for supporting conscious life. The achievement of divine unity represented not an ending but a beginning, as transformed souls gained access to levels of existence and activity that transcended anything possible during mortal life. These entities continue to grow and develop throughout eternity, their enhanced capabilities allowing them to make increasingly sophisticated contributions to the cosmic order, while exploring aspects of reality that remained forever beyond the reach of unenlightened consciousness. The eternal cycle of death, rebirth, and cosmic renewal ensured that the universe maintained its capacity for supporting conscious life, while continuously improving its ability to foster spiritual development among all sentient beings. Each generation of souls that successfully completed the afterlife journey added to the accumulated wisdom and power available for assisting future travellers, creating a self-reinforcing system that grew stronger and more effective over time. The Egyptian understanding of this eternal cycle provided a framework for comprehending individual existence within the context of universal purpose, demonstrating that personal spiritual development served not only individual welfare, but the fundamental requirements of cosmic maintenance and growth. Every soul that achieved successful transformation contributed to the ongoing victory of order over chaos, light over darkness, and consciousness over the void that threatened to reclaim all existence. This cosmic vision transformed death from a source of terror into an opportunity for transcendence, while providing practical guidance for living in ways that supported both personal fulfillment and universal harmony. The elaborate mythology, complex rituals, and sophisticated theological concepts that surrounded Egyptian afterlife beliefs served ultimately to communicate this fundamental truth that individual consciousness possessed infinite potential for growth and contribution to the cosmic order, and that death represented not an ending, but a transformation that opened pathways to previously unimaginable forms of existence and service. The legacy of these beliefs extended far beyond ancient Egypt to influence religious and philosophical traditions throughout human history, providing enduring insights into the relationship between individual spiritual development and cosmic responsibility. The Egyptian vision of death as transformation rather than termination, and of the afterlife as active participation in universal maintenance rather than passive reward or punishment, continues to offer meaningful perspectives for anyone seeking to understand their place within the vast mystery of existence.